It's the year 2004, and, well, really, there's not a whole lot new to add that wasn't already said in the last video in the first game. If you haven't seen that one yet, then come on, what are you doing? Can you see the splash card? I put a lot of effort into those to make them look like the original disclaimers. Come on. You're supposed to watch these in order so you know what I'm referencing. Don't worry, I still love you. But this is the last time, okay? Anyways, the summary of the last video's intro is basically that after the mainline games migrated over to Nintendo's consoles for some horribly misguided reason, the spin-offs were still situated back on the PlayStation 2. The first game, which I guess we can now call Outbreak File 1 in retrospect, came out in 2003 after being severely cut down from their original idea. Thankfully, it sold well enough though, so they tried it again and well, that's not good. Despite actually managing to avoid some of the same mistakes of the first game's release, like actually managing to get some online compatibility in Europe, both game servers were set to shut down in 2007, leaving it as a forgotten relic of the past that nobody can truly experience the same way again. Except that's not true because the community made servers that were created to preserve the online aspects for the foreseeable future. And it's as easy to play now as just downloading an emulator, patching a Japanese copy of the game with English text, setting up specific online settings, creating an account on the website, extracting the game's files so that the load times are actually tolerable, and then finding friends who are willing to go through the same process as well. Hey, here's a completely original thought. This game needs a re-release on modern systems. I'm sure you've never heard that before or seen anybody make a comment like that. It was very brave of me to bring up in this video. But what's true is true. Both Outbreak games have ended up as cult classics in the Resident Evil fandom, as well as the developers of modern Resident Evil games apparently, because they can't stop referencing things from it in the newer games. You guys love it so much that you keep referencing it all the time, but you don't want to re-release it. What's up with that? These games sit right in that comfortable spot where they're obscure enough that passing fans might know nothing about it, but decently invested Resident Evil fans will gladly bring it up as a classic entry despite only having played it anywhere from 0 to 20 hours. Not counting that very dedicated group of superfans that live and breathe these games and know more about it than any big YouTuber, myself included, could ever hope to understand. But hey, I'll give it a shot. First vid did very well and likely got a boost from Resident Evil 9's assumed connection, which was a massive coincidence in my favor. Less so in my favor though was that every big YouTuber miles above me in size and relevancy also made videos around this time as well.
I know you have a choice in YouTube video essay slop, so I thank you in choosing WitchTaunter as the annoying voice that you listen to as you fall asleep.
But it's not about me. Let's take a deep look into what makes this game tick. We've got a lot of comparisons to make and corrections to clarify. How much did the game improve? Where did it take a step back? And is the game better or worse after having an opportunity to really take in player feedback thanks to having a first part? After a nice long analysis, I hope that we can find an answer to that. Let's take a look at Resident Evil Outbreak, File 2. Alright, so just like I said in the last video, these Outbreak games are not a cohesively assembled story that we can just jump right into. Each chapter is disjointed and takes place at different times, with the characters jumping around from location to location without any real connective tissue. Characters are just going to be in one place and then suddenly in the next chapter they're going to be in a completely different place. And if there's any explanation for how they got there or what they're doing, that is not for the likes of you or me to know. Additionally, there's no official canon to the stories presented, and honestly with how many retcons are happening in the modern releases, there's a decent chance that nothing about these games are officially canon anymore. So we don't really have any pretext to set up anything besides the 2.5 hour long video preceding this one. So just like that video, let's take a look at what we can start with. Thankfully, this time all but one of the chapters are selectable immediately from the start. So we don't have the exact same issue that the last game provided, where playing online for your first playthrough locked you out of most of the content excluding the first chapter. And no cheater pumpkin eater save file is necessary for preemptively unlocking everything. Oh, and while we're here, not only is that ugly glitch that we got from the widescreen patch gone, but looky here. They cleaned up the interface a bit and that looks a lot more lively and unique. Actually a little bit pleasant to look at now. Everything is actually stylized now to look like the interface in an old website, as opposed to the core basics of an old website. Looking a little bit more refined, I like it. But what's much more important than inconsequential graphic design would be our main characters, who have each had some change that requires us to go through them once again. If you're like me, then the first thing that you're going to notice is that basically everybody has a change in voice actors. For the less extreme characters, this is something that had very little impact. I can give or take File 1 or File 2's Kevin, Cindy, or George. They don't sound the exact same anymore, but it's fine. They don't really have that recognizable of a voice.
Well, what should I do with the rest of my life? I'll think about it after I take a nap.
Whoa, escaping that plant-infested hell was a rush. And I don't have time to sit and talk about it. If I don't get out of this town soon, the virus will get the best of me, and I'll join those plants myself.
What actually ranges from a solid change to a tragic one would be the sillier characters. Mark no longer sounds like a bad Bill Cosby impression, and can now join most of the cast in sounding generic and forgettable.
I knew this city was weird, but what I've seen takes it to a whole new level.
It's as if the darkness was laughing at us. Though we have no time to waste, we came up against another dead end.
What I'll never get over though is David losing his Shadow the Hedgehog voice. He's still nice and edgy personality-wise, but that voice is what sent him over the top for me, and I was mourning its absence every time I picked him.
I'm still in the city of wriggling dead bodies, forced to listen to their moans. When is this stupid game gonna end?
The city reeks of blood and rotting flesh. No matter where you go, you hear those things moaning. I'll take their invitation and cut them a new asshole if that's what they're after.
But now moving on to the gameplay. Each character has been given a new unique item that they spawn with, thus increasing their speciality even further than before. It'd be hard to complain about a feature like this unless something was incredibly broken or useless. But for the most part, I find there to be at least a specific use case for everything here, which is great. If any character was a bit too similar in the last game, then this helps set them apart even further and allows for even more variety when playing as a group. And speaking of groups, you're allowed to pick your partners this time. Before, this used to be predetermined based on the character that you pick in the chapter that you're playing. If you play as Yoko on Below Freezing Point, then you're always going to be paired up with George and Alyssa. Jim on Hellfire always gets you Alyssa and David. That sort of thing. But now you can pick whoever you want, regardless of synergy and personality. Oh yeah, the personality thing. Yeah, I might have pulled the trigger a little bit too early when I brought that up in the first video, because now I can very clearly see that each character interacts with both you and the world differently in a way that they didn't back in File 1. Certain characters are aggressive, some are meek, some pal up with you, some run away. And so picking characters as your teammates can actually be beneficial or detrimental depending on what you're looking for. So let's go through everyone individually once again and discuss what's different. For the most part, each character's personality is the same, but if there's anything to really make note of in that category, I'll try to bring it up. And the first character on the list is Kevin Ryman.
Yes!
He's cooperative with characters like Yoko and George, but he is canonically racist and hates Mark because of the color of his skin. Being the powerhouse character, he loves to pick fights with enemies, so he's generally aggressive towards everything. His new unique item is an extra magazine for his special 45 handgun, which ends up making him even more powerful and useful for beginners. An extra 7 pot shots with the 45 can be extremely useful for some scenarios or challenges, and once you use it up, it's super easy to just drop off the empty mag and resume normal operations. He was strong before, and now he's even stronger. Simple, but effective stuff. Next up is Mark Wilkins. Who, as I just said, is a victim of Kevin's bigotry, but he does get along well with Jim and David. His new item is also a magazine, but since it's for his regular old handgun, it's not as special. Probably one of the more boring new items, but hey, damage is damage. Personally, I think since Mark is one of the most defensive characters in the game, he should have gotten something that emphasized his defense. Maybe some kind of item that reduces the amount of damage he takes. That way you can give it to another player if they're struggling. Besides that, I should also probably bring up something I forgot in the previous video, which is that Mark has what is essentially the melee equivalent to Kevin's pot shot, being capable of charging up a super swing that really sends enemies flying. After taking an ability like this into account, I probably was a little bit too dismissive of the melee weapons in this game. So with all these new things considered, he is a bit stronger than I originally said he is in File 1, but it's not that much of a difference, and his new item is still kinda lame. Following him, we have Jim Chapman.
Yeah.
Obviously, he is going to be accentuating his gimmicks from the first game, namely his cowardice and his luck-based items. Jim will generally run away from everything, including other players, regardless of if it's the people he likes, Mark or Cindy, or the people that he doesn't, that being Yoko for some reason. I would have thought he'd hate somebody who's aggressive or mean like David, but I guess the quiet nerdy girl is easy enough to take your frustrations out on. And in the last video, I forgot to bring up his melee combo moves that are similar to David's knife combos. Should definitely be noted though that Jim's combo is a lot more punishing than David's, since if you fail to properly perform the combo, then Jim will go into a recovery animation that is at best a waste of time and at worst leaving you vulnerable to enemies. I can't tell you exactly how much more damage a combo like this does to an enemy, but with it being so punishing if you fail to pull it off, I find myself never wanting to use it. And speaking of never really wanting to use it, he also has the ability to just find things on the map immediately when entering a room, which is cool, I guess. I just never really found a use for it personally. But what is most commonly brought up is how I grazed past his hidden potential and his coin flips. People really wanted me to know how potentially powerful he could be. If you don't remember, Jim has a unique coin item that he can flip that'll either land on heads or tails. If it lands on heads, then his critical hit chance goes up dramatically, and this can be stacked over and over again so long as you keep landing on heads. If you sit around flipping it for long enough, then his critical hit chance does become remarkable, genuinely powerful enough to make a difference. It's just at the cost of having to sit around and flipping the damn coin instead of actually playing the game. But paired up with his new unique item, another coin, which increases his critical rate even further and stops items from breaking as often, he can be a real menace to the zombies. Clear upgrade here. And now we have George Hamilton.
Hi.
George was one of the characters that I was harshest to. Honestly, there's a surprising amount of George defenders out there, and they will not be happy with me because I'm not sure I feel much different about him here. Obviously, he gets along with Cindy since the two are healing buddies, but he also likes Kevin, and Alyssa would be the one on his shit list. Just like before, he's still prone to making medicine and antivirals for himself and the groups to use. He can also utilize medicine bases to more regularly create healing items. This was present in the previous game, but I feel like they made an active effort to include way more of these bases in File 2, while I very rarely ran into them in File 1, which is why I didn't even bring it up in the last video. His unique item is the Ampule Shooter from the Decisions campaign, now called the Capsule Shooter. And it's a bit interesting as a gameplay mechanic, how he's in line with Cindy and being able to heal his teammates. But unlike her, he does it by firing a pill at you at dangerously high speeds. That's not a joke either. The capsules actually do hurt anyone you hit them with, even if it heals them immediately after. George is no longer asking for you to take his medicine. You are going to take it and you will like it. An interesting detail about it though is that the capsule shooter can be used offensively too. The antivirus pills that you usually take to halt your virus gauge can be placed inside of the shooter and fired at enemies to deal massive amounts of damage. If used correctly, I can see this thing really making a difference. So if you're a pro George user, I respect you. I respect the hell out of you. I genuinely do. I still just personally don't enjoy using him. So sorry to anybody who was hoping for a change in opinion, but he's still my least favorite character. After that, we have David King.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, despite his edgy attitude, he does get along with Mark and Yoko, and he doesn't like Cindy, because if anybody was gonna hate the universally beloved cute girl character, it would be him. David was already kind of a beast when it came to his speciality, so learning that his new item is simply a lighter isn't that shocking. The lighter is an item with a ton of very niche uses. It's needed to craft the flame spray combo item that is exclusive to David, but it's also needed to ignite a Molotov cocktail, and there are a few spots in the game that require a lighter in order to see hidden items in the darkness. That's a decently long list, but all of these things are really niche, so it's not the most useful extra item here. In fact, I might even say it's the worst. But if you know what you're doing, you certainly can make use of it. Also, in File 2, his knife combo gets another swing to it, which makes it even more powerful than before. At this point though, it's taking a lot of practice just to be able to pull the swing off, let alone doing it in the middle of combat. The trick is to press the attack button as soon as the swing would hit an enemy, but when you're standing point blank in front of a hunter, that can be a little hard to nail. Really, David doesn't get that much of a boost between the two games, but he was already pretty decent to begin with, so there's not much to complain about. And now we're at Alyssa Ashcroft, rip in peace.
Yes.
Now, if this wiki page is accurate, it says that Alyssa manages to like David and George, despite George apparently hating her guts. Clearly, there's something that George isn't telling her. Instead, she hates Jim, which I think kind of makes sense. She's so assertive and aggressive, I can see her being put off by Jim's cowardice. Her new item is the stun gun, which is pretty solid. It does decent damage to most enemies, but it does extra damage to some of the more annoying ones like Hunter Gammas and Lickers. Plus, it can be recharged with all those extra batteries that you're going to be running into that used to be useless unless you were David. Paired with her lockpick, she still remains one of the most useful characters in the game. No real change here. So let's move on to Yoko Suzuki.
Okay.
Just like Alyssa, she ends up liking somebody who hates her, that being Jim alongside Alyssa, while hating George, which I think works in my headcanon that George being a doctor reminds her of the bad things she did before she lost her memory. I like to imagine that she doesn't like him and doesn't even really know why. Since Yoko was always a passive character meant for people just beginning the game, she continues the trend of lightening the stress on new players with a lucky charm that prevents instant deaths and slows down infection rates. Since these things can be annoying for new players, it makes sense for her to begin with it. And yes, I do believe she is best for new players, regardless of what some commenters might think. Oh, and it should go without saying, but new players probably shouldn't be jumping into games with veteran players on very hard difficulty. That's a really good recipe for being left in the dust and not really learning anything, while a bunch of hardcore professionals do everything for you, and you're just weighing them down while they drag you through the game. I would think that would go without saying, but here we are. Lastly, and possibly most importantly, we have Cindy Lennox. She likes George and Kevin and dislikes David, presumably for being a meanie head. And her new item is a bandage, which protects anyone who holds it from the bleed status automatically. Considering how brutal bleed can be, this ends up being one of the best add-ons in the game. Although I do generally find myself abandoning it very early, since you only have 4 inventory slots to work with. So it's pretty clear that the #1 least popular opinion of mine from the last video was that Cindy is one of my least favorite characters. And everybody immediately came out to tell me how wrong I was. It didn't help that I made a vague tier list that was based on multiple factors like how beginner friendly they are or even how interesting I personally find them. But that was kind of my point about how shallow subjective tier lists can be. But I get it. I get where you're all coming from. And don't worry, everybody. I've put in the time now. When bringing up how amazing Cindy is, every single person would mention her dodge move, which is something that I didn't go into much detail about in the first video because I didn't use the female characters that much. So let's clarify that real quick. Each female character has a dodge unique to them that allows them to either negate or move from damage. Alyssa gets this backstep that doesn't really give her any meaningful iframes, but it does move her out of the way of danger. That's presuming that the danger isn't longer than her 2 slow-ass steps. It's not great, and generally people don't acknowledge it when playing as Alyssa. Yoko has this crawl whose length can be adjusted as needed, and it absolutely showers her in iframes. The major downside though is that it's really awkward to use, since she always crawls in the opposite direction that you're facing. You either have to be constantly showing your back to the enemy, or you have to be comfortable constantly moving away from your target. It's better, but it's incredibly cumbersome to use and requires a lot of practice. Then here comes Cindy with the swagger and grace of an Olympic goddess, and she tells the other two, "Let me show you how it's done." She has one sudden and decently lengthy crouch that doesn't move her around and gives her a reasonable amount of iframes. With it, you can negate 70% of the attacks in the game, and it isn't even hard to learn. It's a built-in I deny your attack button. Yeah, it's incredible. Compared to everything else in the game, it's borderline busted. In the first game, I never felt like I needed anything like this, but that's obviously just because I was learning how to play the game. Now that I got the basics down and I've played the game for a good 100 hours or so, the next step is just learning metas and how to dodge through attacks. I also consider File 2 to be a lot harder than the first game, so I ended up using her a lot more. So yeah, I'm a Cindy believer now. You guys did it. I'm convinced. I was not just wrong in the last video, I was absurdly wrong. Cindy is the de facto best character in the game, and I apologize for my transgressions, my queen. It's just, you know, it's a shame that she's still kind of boring as a character. But she is a cute girl, and who am I to disagree with the internet gooners? So without learning any lessons from the first time I did this, here's an updated tier list that should be taken 100% as fact. And if you disagree with me in any way, it means you're an inferior person with bad tastes. Jokes aside, with everybody getting new perks, I do feel like the list is a bit more even now. Less dramatic jumps between tiers because each character is a bit more balanced. Or maybe I'm just more experienced, I don't know. I do feel like there is a lot of value in trying to determine whether or not a character is good for a new player. It's a nuance that can sometimes be forgotten whenever you view everything through the lens of a meta. But even now, after playing through both games, I'm still not one of the most professional players in the world or anything, so give my voice as much value as you want. Now that we're done with that, we can look at the scenarios themselves. But first, we should look at the intro video. File 1 began with that incredible sequence with the rats and the USS soldiers, paired up with a beautiful theme song that really made the start of the game feel like something special. This time, File 2 doesn't have a cutscene after we begin the first chapter, so I guess the closest thing would be the video that plays when you sit on the title screen for too long. And unfortunately, it is a step down from what we got in the first game. File 1 was so visually inspired, retelling the beginning of the outbreak from a rat's point of view. It was so great. And this time, all we have are these panning shots of the various environments in the game. Same outbreak theme, which, you know, it's as good as ever, but without the interesting visuals behind it, it feels like it's really missing something. I guess you could say that File 2 is showing off what is in store, but beyond just getting a glimpse at a room's layout, there isn't anything to latch onto here. No glimpse at enemies, no story being told. Every room is empty and doesn't mean anything until we actually get to it in the game. It's just a really disappointing way to start the game, at least if we compare it to the first one. But that's fine, because now we can enter the very first level. And to my surprise, it's not actually a level, it's a tutorial. That was one of my early big complaints about the first game, that there were these tutorial files located within the first level, but that first level was also constantly pushing you forward with the flow of infinite zombies breaking down any and every door between you and them. It was to the point that the most comfortable way that you could have learned about the game was not by playing it and reading the files within the game, but rather reading the manual, I guess. Which, yeah, that's something to consider as a product from a different time. We don't get manuals anymore nowadays in our physical media because the world hates us and everything fucking sucks. But back then you could have learned about everything you needed to know just by reading the booklet. That said, I do still think that every single game should have a tutorial inside of it in order to teach players how to play in case you don't have a manual. And from what it seems like, the developers agreed. Because now we get the training grounds. A dedicated level that lets you run around Jay's bar from the Outbreak scenario in File 1 while learning the basics, moving, combining, healing, even a little snippet of each character's skills directly laid out for you to understand. And while everything here is helpful, they leave enough for the players to learn by themselves when it comes to the unique quirks of the mechanics in game, like how I had to learn how to let zombies open doors in order for me to pass them, which actually got a change here. They realized it was a bit too easy and boring to wait for a zombie to open a door so that way you can change spots. So they sped up the process here by allowing you to open doors yourself, and then forcing you to wait for each zombie to pass through since they now attack through doorways. Overall, the mechanic still remains the same. As soon as the zombie is done attacking, you can just run through the door that they opened, but it seems like they were trying to make it slightly more difficult for you. It's stuff like that you just have to learn by playing the game, since, as I said in the first video, the Outbreak games are incredibly dense in mechanics, and playing them like a classic Resident Evil game is a good way to get killed, especially on the higher difficulties. So great, they added a tutorial level, but that's not what we're here to check out. Let's get into the first real scenario in File 2, Wild Things. As we immediately see, this level takes place inside Raccoon Zoo. Not a zoo of raccoons, but the zoo of Raccoon City, if that wasn't obvious. And that already has me intrigued. The camera pans across the remains of several different animals, almost like it's hinting at what new creatures we could possibly run into. Zombie zebras? Giraffes? Gorillas, like in that Resident Evil 1.5 game? We land on the corpse of a rhino that is in the process of being consumed before the zombies are trampled upon by a massive, mysterious creature. We can only guess as to what it could possibly be with its enormous frame, trumpeting roar, and trunk-like silhouette, but I'm sure we'll find out soon enough. In the next scene, we see Cindy reading some flyers on a map. A trend that you will notice for most of these new scenarios in File 2 is that many of the ignored characters that didn't get any kind of focus in the first game will now be given token slots in cutscenes or in levels. Outbreak File 1 was kinda Yoko and George heavy, so it seems like they were trying to spread out the screen time a bit more, even if it is a bit arbitrary. Like this cutscene, for instance. It didn't have to be Cindy. There's nothing about this level that really connects to her, nor does it expand her character in any meaningful way. She's kind of just thrown in here so it looks like they did more with their cast, which I guess is better than nothing, even if it is really shallow and I would have preferred some actual characterization for some of these people. Anyways, Cindy reads the flyers and they say that the RPD will be sending helicopters to pick up survivors in front of the zoo. Unfortunately, here we are at the rear entrance. So that leaves only one way to reach it in time, passing right through. First though is a brief introductory area. A big wide open space for you to practice running around. You can find a decent variety of weapons and secrets, and there's multiple solutions to move forward. Even a few basic zombies for you to practice getting some shots in. Or if you just want to knock them around, whatever you're into, man. Point is that it's a good practice location, and it gives us an opportunity to show off some of the new moves that File 2 introduced. Once again, the devs are trying their hardest to accommodate the complaints of people who refuse to play these classic Resident Evil games on their own terms. The big one was making the movement system based on alternate controls as opposed to the tank controls, which I incorrectly said was introduced in File 1. No, that credit goes to the Nintendo 64 version of Resident Evil 2, which is once again proving to be way more interesting than you'd expect for a port. It just keeps biting me in the ass for not talking about it earlier, god damn it. But the next step after caving to movement complaints is to cave to combat complaints. Now you get the ability to strafe and move around while shooting by holding the aim button and L1 at the same time. This locks you onto the closest target and lets you slowly tiptoe away from monsters to get a menial distance from them before they charge at you for half a second and then close all that distance you just made. Okay, I'm being a little bit harsh on it. Any distance is good when it comes to moving away from the thing that is currently trying to eat your tender, juicy flesh. It's just a really slow speed. There have been times where that's all I needed in order to avoid an attack, so, you know, it comes in handy. It's just not what I think most people would expect whenever it comes to moving and shooting at the same time. They'd probably expect something more like Dead Space's movie shooty playstyle, or if we're really leaning into it, then maybe Resident Evil 6's style of runny gunny, but this is incredibly tame in comparison to either of those. Oh, but hey, it did naturally reveal to me the button combo I needed to take down flying enemies. No longer am I publicly humiliating myself in front of thousands of people as I get killed by a bird who refuses to stay fucking still. Nope, now they're easy peasy to take out. Actually, they might be a little bit too easy to kill now. I always thought that because they could be killed in 1 to 2 shots, that the trade-off was supposed to be that they were harder to clear out than the shambling corpses that slowly walk towards you in a straight line. But now they just serve as nothing more than a minor inconvenience to have to lock onto. The biggest hurdle is just having a handgun to fire a single round at them. It kinda waters down their importance, but yeah, I guess it beats this shit. Anyways, after either entering the code to the gate's lock or cutting the entire thing off, We finally get to enter the Raccoon Zoo, and as soon as all the players are present within the gate, we are jumped by a spooky zombie elefante! This big fella is officially named Oscar in the game, but in the menus he is officially referred to as Titan. Not sure which one is more considered to be more official than the other, but the two titles do give different vibes. Titan makes him feel powerful and threatening, while also working decently in both pre and post monstrification. Like, he's always kind of been intimidating, being a 20-ton creature and all. So I could see people referring to him as that. Oscar, however, is a borderline silly and basic name that feels like a remnant from his pre-infection days. Something cutesy to be called out by his trainer in order to appeal to a crowd, and it feels out of place now that he's a rampaging beast that tramples everything in his path. Personally, I prefer Oscar since that vibe plays into his gameplay as well. He seems to be able to recognize the parade music that used to play during his performing days. Playing it at specific predetermined locations drags him away from whatever he was doing before in order to destroy whatever is playing that tune. Not sure exactly if that's the T-Virus talking or the big guy had some kind of bad memory associated with it, but it's a great touch to give him more personality than the average zombified creature. After all, an elephant always remembers. When Oscar isn't being herded around with the possibly tormenting music of his life, he serves as yet another stalker enemy type, a pervasive threat that always has a chance of popping up right when you really don't want something grabbing you and tossing you around like a ragdoll. It is pretty ballsy to include something like this right away in the first chapter of the game. You'd think they'd go with something a little bit more simple in order to ease players in, since there is a non-0% chance that Outbreak File 2 is somebody's first experience with these games. But no, they're going all out right out of the gate. Impressive, especially considering that Oscar is fairly unique compared to other stalker enemies that we've seen in the franchise. For instance, in File 1 we encountered the Leech Man, a somehow invincible flesh puppet that would chase players around one by one. Oscar is different because despite being a stalker, he doesn't seem to have that much of an interest in players that aren't directly in front of him. While he does gladly take the opportunity to thrash upon the establishment immediately within his view, he isn't really holding any grudges against anyone specifically, and will take his leave to trample whatever else he might find if he gets bored. He's an agent of chaos that just comes and goes as he pleases, so it's less of a constant threat that is hounding you, and more of a momentary annoyance that you kind of have to deal with every now and then. Often it just plays out like, "Oh dear, it would seem that the elephant has returned. I do hope he doesn't create too large of a kerfuffle," and you try your best to just ignore him or move around him. Sometimes he'll be blocking entire pathways, other times he'll stick his head into the zoo's office building to knock down anything he manages to hit with his trunk, which is delightfully presented to us by this one zombie that is always programmed to be taken away to lands unknown. What is a bit lame though is that what you see inside here has no correlation to what's happening out there. Regardless of Oscar's position on the map, he'll always pop into one of these windows and force you to time your passage past him. It's a bit unfortunate. I think it would have been neat to see him distracted with whoever is inside the building from the outside, or to be able to pick and choose when it's safest to be indoors, but it's not a deal breaker. The other notable feature is that unlike the Leech Man, he actually isn't invincible. Getting rid of a stalker enemy at some point is nothing new, and Oscar's no different. Using the previously mentioned parade music, or just waiting until he randomly wanders his dumbass into the trap, you can close the gates on his pen after turning the power on to almost permanently keep him away from bothering you. If that's a bit too much effort for you though, you can just blast the shit out of him and kill him early. Even bosses like Mr. X and Nemesis were intended to get back up again later, but Oscar will permanently stay down if you choose to take him out. All of these things make for a stalker enemy that isn't too demanding. He won't constantly harass you, and you can take him down if you have the ammo and time for it. It's just enough leniency to not crush new players. Pair that up with the fact that this stalker is a fucking elephant, and you have an encounter that is incredibly unique and memorable. And speaking of memorable, we can get to the primary area focused in Wild Things. First off, I am absolutely in love with the theming here. A zombified zoo is a premise that is just bursting with potential. Tons of stylized environments and opportunities for environmental storytelling, and for the most part, Wild Things lives up to it, or at least what you would expect from a bite-sized scenario like the Outbreak games have to offer. We already talked about how the zoo held elephant parades and how that's carried over into Oscar's mechanics, but we also get things like animal shows that are less abandoned than you'd hope, a lush terrarium that possibly participated in illegal orchid trading of all crimes, a swamp exhibit whose pathing has been destroyed, forcing you to swim through the treacherous waters, and my favorite, whatever the hell happened to this tiger that resulted in it being strung up like this. It's great stuff, dripping with personality, especially when you compare it to Resident Evil Lab number 257, or just running through the streets of Raccoon City for the 500th time. But of course, when it comes to a zoo, the stars are the creatures found within. Here we get a modestly diverse selection of animals that have become bloodthirsty monsters. The roaming elephant is a unique enough choice on its own, but backing it up are a pack of hyenas, tropical birds, alligators, mutant flowers, and what must be an entire fucking pride of lions. Again, it's a good group for what you'd expect from a single scenario in an Outbreak game, but it really makes me want something like this with more content than just a single scenario. Especially since there are some obvious corners being cut, which, you know, can't blame them. These are games that were notoriously cranked out after being way too ambitious for their own good. So it's not difficult to notice something like the hyenas basically just being reskinned dogs, or the hornbills having no behavior that makes them distinct from the crows. Still, considering how infrequent alternate skins for enemies like these are, it's clear that they're still going above and beyond what they needed to. Besides, there are some unique enemies thrown in for good measure. The alligator in the swamp exhibit is basically one of the sharks from Decisions, except now it doesn't just insta-kill you. Instead, it just mostly nibbles at your toesies while you're on land. We do, however, get to witness the beauty of symbiosis in nature, as there is a single dickhead hornbill that will absolutely ruin your attempts to cross the swamp, as it repeatedly holds you in place for the alligator to finish you off. But since it only shows up for this room and this room alone, it's not that remarkable. Slightly more unique is the overgrown flower that has somewhat taken over the terrarium. And by taken over, I mean that there's some of those generic vines that will hold you back for a second that are mechanically the same as the vines in the first Resident Evil game. The flower itself is apparently a rafflesia, a massive parasitic flower that reeks of rotting flesh, and that is currently for some reason attracting giant bees or wasps or something as they block the path below with their constant buzzing. So this offers the opportunity to waste ammo and move past the vines on the upper floors, or you can just drop a big old block on the flower to open up the path below, at the cost of pissing off the bees. You'd think that doing that would just make all of the bees immediately zero in on anything even remotely alive within the dome, but instead it causes them to wildly zoom around specific paths on only the lower floor. Their behavior is oddly scripted, where they just spin around in circles for a bit before zooming down the path and back again. So it's this really hard to read and somewhat unpredictable pattern that you have to learn in order to sneak past without taking any damage and possibly getting poisoned. This entire thing doesn't feel very thought out to me, and it's really missing the potential that it could have had. Imagine a terrarium that was the only place on the map stuffed to burst with insane flora mutations. Instead, they just didn't go very hard on the whole plant thing, and the focus ended up being more on some bizarrely programmed bees. Not even cool monster bees, just like normal ones that are obnoxiously hard to read. Still, I guess I appreciate the variety. It's pretty clear that most of the effort went into the last of the unique enemies, the zombie lions. And by effort, I mean that they made these things powerful as hell, which is quite the surprise since most of the unique monsters in the first game were worthless when it comes to being a threat. Nah, these guys, or rather girls, since all but one of them seem to be lionesses, can take around 3 to 5 shotgun shells just to kill one of them, and they usually come in groups, or they have the option to make them a group, like this truck that obviously holds a lion within it, and it only opens if somebody accidentally interacts with it because fuck you, I guess. They even put an herb right in front of it. They're just asking for somebody to misclick. Once you get more than one of these things together, it doesn't really matter how many iframes your weird little crouch dodge thing has. They can pace their attacks out in a way that leaves you little to no room to retaliate. You really need to understand how these things work if you don't want to be knocked around constantly. Their most common attack would be a chase and pounce that they do whenever you are considered to be comfortably far away from any man-eating lions, which can be hard to avoid. But then they have this backslap move that they do anytime you try to pass behind them or stand next to them, or dare to move around them in any way. The hitbox on the attack is huge and there's little to no windup for it. They're pretty much covered when it comes to their range of attacks, and their bulk in numbers means that you won't be getting rid of them very easily without tons of ammo or high-powered weaponry. It's surprisingly mean for an introductory special enemy type, a massive step up from the brain-dead hunters and lickers in the previous game. But you know what? I welcome it. I want some hard monsters in these games. I'd like a little bit of challenge when it comes to the big scary things trying to kill me. So good job, File 2. Now for the main portion of the scenario. Our primary goal once we enter the zoo is going to be turning on the power in order to operate everything important. From opening the front gate so that we can escape, to putting Oscar in timeout for almost immediately killing Cindy. He needs to think about what he did. And in order for us to turn on the power, we're gonna need a code for the system. The devs seem to have learned something from all the people who tried to speedrun by memorizing the table of possible answers in the previous game, because now you're not allowed to preemptively enter anything. No, now the game is forcing you to explore and find the code before even being able to attempt entering it. And that means getting to appreciate what this scenario has to offer every time you play through it. The level design of the zoo is incredibly easy to understand. So much so that I might even call it comfy. Or, you know, as comfy as it can get when it comes to a stressful survival horror video game. It's all just one level, so you only have to focus on a single massive floor. And the layout is basically several different circles that all connect together at various points. Sometimes opening the connections requires a key item, sometimes it's just a secret passage you have to cleverly discover on your own, but it makes it so that everything loops back into itself multiple times. And each new lead that you discover down a route will always head you back to where you need to go next. There is a natural flow to how you play through it that just feels good to figure out, while not being too easy thanks to the limited inventory space and various monsters patrolling each path. And not only is the natural progression satisfying, but there are plenty of additional secrets to find in order to get additional bonuses. A simple reoccurring idea is the trade-in of raccoon medallions for powerful items by throwing them into the statue of Mr. Raccoon, which might look familiar if you've been playing the modern Resident Evil games. This specific design first shows up here as the mascot for Raccoon Zoo. Again, the devs for the modern games seem to love Outbreak, they just don't love porting it apparently. But here he takes tokens in order to give out one of the crucial key items for the scenario, and then he asks for way more than is worth my pay grade in order to get some ammunition for the level specific hunting rifle, which is one of the most powerful weapons in the game. It's capable of one-shotting any of the lions, which immediately makes it worthwhile to keep on somebody, but you'll almost definitely be needing it for the boss of the stage. So Outbreak File 2 started going really hard on the whole alternate routes thing, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, but we'll tackle each of those as we come to them. And for Wild Things, we are given the opportunity to pick and choose what the final boss of the level will be. That is assuming you don't just naturally run through the game like some kind of normal person. If you do that, then I think it's more likely that you'll end up with the zoo's only male lion as the final boss of the stage. Just like Oscar/Titan, this guy has his own real/epic gamer name. An in-game pamphlet names him Max the Lion and gives him a voice, where he talks about all the sexy lionesses being put in his cage that he's totally gonna fuck. Why did they make him sound like a creep? The menus instead give him the title of Stalker, which, considering his creepy dude bro monologue about his new roomies, might be accurate. Anyways, he isn't very special because he just behaves like one of the normal lions. Well, with one big difference. After taking enough damage, he'll jump onto the tram's roof in order to pace around for a few seconds. I assume this exists in order to give the players a moment to catch their breath and pick up some of the items that have been thrown around. But if you don't need that because you were using the hunting rifle or something powerful like that, then it's kind of just wasting your time as you wait for the cowardly lion to jump back down for his ass whooping. Kinda boring, and honestly, I don't feel like it needed to be included. You see, the obvious choice for the final boss, and the other potential option for the player to choose to fight against, is the major iconic threat of the level, Oscar. As I mentioned way back when I talked about how he works, you are given the opportunity to trap the elephant in gay baby jail after turning the power on, which not only gives us the benefit of stopping his harassment, but it also drops a few goodies from the body of a guy that I can only assume was hilariously tossed up there. From that point on, you can continue into the boss room in order to encounter Max. However, if you either sit around for like 5 minutes, specifically in the elephant stage part of the map, or I guess you and your friends can dick around there for a bit too long, then Oscar will eventually break out of his confinement, for no baby jail can hold an elephant as gay as him. After that happens, he will resume his regularly scheduled rampaging up until you reach the tram station, where he'll then burst out of the zoo's walls as the boss of the level. Now you actually do have to fight him, him, assuming that you didn't do that earlier. Since he can serve as the final boss, it pretty much makes killing him earlier nearly pointless, and a massive waste of ammo, unless you just want the bragging rights of saying you killed both bosses in a single run. I'd argue that Oscar feels like the intended final boss. Not only is he well set up in previous parts of the scenario, but this area feels designed with him in mind. At each end of the tram station, there are cassette players that you can put the parade music tapes in to distract Oscar and force him to destroy the kiosks, not only dealing a bunch of damage to him, but also giving you a bit of free time if you needed to take a breather. It would just require somebody to give up 1 or 2 inventory slots. Otherwise, you're going to be forced to deal with Oscar charging back and forth with his massive body knocking down anybody in his way, or his long-ass trunk sweeping people off their feet. And of course they throw in an insta-kill move for the funsies, but my favorite is the one where he tosses a player up in the air and they end up landing head first. He's incredibly bulky as a boss, much more so than Max, and taking him head on can take a really long time. That is, unless you know how to deal with him. I honestly have no idea how you were supposed to figure this out on your own. There aren't any notes that mention it or hint towards it being a thing, and there isn't any reason to immediately assume that he has some kind of Achilles heel like this. But Oscar has a key weak point that you have to go out of your way for. If you aren't already aware of it, can you guess what it would be? Would it be his big dumb head because you're aiming for the brain? Would it be the stomach since his guts are constantly hanging out as a kick-ass part of the design? No, none of that. We're aiming for his open mouth, but only whenever he rears up and reveals it to us. Any other time won't accomplish anything. I mean, I kind of get it. They're probably going for a Luke Cage-esque logic where his insides are softer than his skin. But aside from just getting a lucky shot, I have no clue how I was supposed to figure this out organically. Like, even if I land a shot on him, how am I supposed to immediately tell that I dealt more damage? How do I know that that was something special and not just a regular stagger animation? It is crucial to take Oscar down in a reasonable amount of time though, and it's basically required to know for harder difficulties. So let's hope that somebody tells you before you try this yourself. That information could have been hinted at better, but once you know it, I think Oscar's fight is pretty enjoyable, and landing those critical shots is fairly rewarding. It's not a bad boss, and it doesn't suffer from the same amount of annoying downtime that Max's fight does. So after killing whichever boss you ended up with, we're able to escape on the tram and head for the pickup location. But oh dear, it would seem that the chopper didn't make it very far before crashing and getting swarmed. And just like the first game, nearly all of these character-specific scenario-ending cutscenes are identical, with the difference being a brief monologue each character gets to make themselves, which always contains the incredible insight of, "This kinda sucks."
No matter how tightly I shut my eyes, I simply couldn't erase what I had already seen.
I felt good, like a man who's put in a hard day at work and is ready for an ice cold beer, or maybe a lay. But I'd let my guard down. It's not like me. It couldn't go on like that forever.
I must have said this sucks about 1,000,000 times that day, and that was close about 1,000,000 more.
And so that's Wild Things, and while it suffers from just being a single scenario in Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, I still think that this is the most hyped for a chapter that I've been since Decisions. I love the ambition that is present here. A fairly unique stalker enemy in the form of a badass zombie elephant, an interesting looping level design, a wide variety of locations and zombified animals, monsters that actually challenge you, and a single satisfying boss fight. The only thing it's missing is the length and depth that Decisions had. But yeah, I really like Wild Things. Let's keep that list of best to worst scenarios going from the first video, where I'll be putting Wild Things right below Decisions, making it my second favorite chapter between the two games so far. It's a fantastic introductory level for new players. It's a win-win, and the only reason it doesn't take first place is because it's hard to beat Decisions' complex length and endings. My hopes are immediately high for the rest of the game, so let's see if it maintains this momentum as we head into the next scenario. The second level is named Underbelly, and similar to Hellfire, there's no real lead into this location. We just see us wildly running away from zombies before entering the closest door, this time being a subway. There isn't any character-specific cutscenes for some reason, which is unusual because unlike Wild Things and Cindy, this location actually does seem related to somebody. Jim works in the subway, as we can see from the dozens of zombies wearing the exact same uniform, so this would have been the perfect opportunity to give Jim some screen time. time. Well, that and Jim is one of the few characters that has a remarkable personality, so, I would have liked to see something involving him, but whatever. So Underbelly begins by splitting all the players up, just like in Below Freezing Point. But unlike that scenario, it doesn't really do anything with the idea. Below Freezing Point had the players sectioned off onto different floors that contained different key items that were collectively needed in order to progress. So not only was your first goal to get the floor's important tools, but you were also working together to regroup and combine what everybody collected, or to pick up whoever sucked and got downed all alone, whatever works. Underbelly revolutionizes this idea by separating players early on, and then they go down some stairs and they are immediately regrouped, and there was no conflict or danger from being split up. Kinda makes you wonder why that was included at all, but I guess is something. Now, compared to most scenarios, I think Underbelly might have the least to talk about. It's a very simple level without a whole lot of distinctive mechanics or things that set it apart from the rest of the Outbreak chapters. The way Underbelly works is that you are slowly but surely moving further and further away from the safety of your starting position as you go deeper into the employee passages, before eventually returning and getting ready to finish the chapter with all the key items gathered. Basically running from one end to the other and back in as few loops as you can get away with. You begin at the core of the entire map, a massive open subway track that allows for easy evasion from most enemies. Hell, the zombies that spawn here are actually completely incapable of falling on the tracks, so if you ever feel a little bit overwhelmed, you can just run to the other side and then back up the stairs because all these areas are connected. This subway area just serves as what could be considered a base of operations. I mean, there isn't much to do here, but it obviously holds a functional tram that we need to escape. It's just a matter of finding the two busts that will detach the car and allow us to drive away, because I guess everything in Raccoon City has to be a fucking puzzle. It isn't until we find a way into the employee passages where the real gameplay begins. From here, we explore a bunch of rooms and tunnels while the zombies begin finally posing a threat, as they won't stop harassing us as we try to process all the information that we gather. Pretty normal for Outbreak, but it's a shame that all the passageways here are just land to look at. I hope you like the color gray, because that's all we're seeing from here on out. It's just grays and blacks and browns and beige and all these concrete hallways. It's just generic maintenance tunnels that honestly make me wish we were back at the subway section. It wasn't much better, but it's something. The only thing that I feel like I could possibly make a note of would be count them, two goo rooms that are obviously hinting towards something in the future. Well, one of them isn't hinting. It actually is full of the monsters right from the get-go, but it's so dark you might not be able to make out what you're looking at. That's something. It's kinda neat. But after you make the mistake of entering there once, you're probably never going to make that mistake again, though it's very short-lived, assuming that you don't choose to spend much more time in the room full of monsters that are currently eating you. While there is a little bit of environmental storytelling, the actually notable rooms are still vastly outnumbered by the gray and brown concrete hallways. The only thing really happening here is some of the most bare bones Resident Evil gameplay that's all isolated into these employee areas. You can complete almost everything needed to finish the level while you're here, but that's not going to be immediately obvious on your first playthrough. But doing everything in one run is highly recommended, because if you end up returning to the tram with one of two busts, you'll be greeted by this. These are megabytes, and after this cutscene, they begin taking place of almost every zombie that you encounter up to this point. They seem to be giant fleas that have apparently retained their natural appearance despite their rapid growth. And that's kind of uninspired, if you ask me, especially if you compare it to other giant bugs that the T-Virus has created. In fact, the Drain Demos / Brain Suckers from Resident Evil 3 were somewhat implied to be massive mutated parasites that picked up human features thanks to the unholy monster juice that they were hopped up on. It just seems weird to have incorporated some interesting body horror into some of these monsters, but then we get to the megabytes and they're just big fleas. Like, yeah, sure, I guess we can just control T on this and what I said in the Resident Evil 0 video still stands. Who needs actual interesting designs if you can just make something big? Anything is scary if you make it big enough. So if you were tired of the bleed mechanic after playing through the Hive, then I'm sorry to report that we are back on our regular bullshit. Megabytes begin at a much smaller size than the ones we encounter at the tram. At this size, they speedily hop around to nearby players, and if they successfully land an attack, they latch on and begin greedily sucking out all their delicious juices. If they manage to fully pull it off, then they will fall off the player and then suddenly grow to multiple times their original size, becoming engorged with blood. And I think we're all suffering suffering from a case of mass hysteria or something? Because I could have sworn that the smaller versions of these fleas would have just been called bites, and then when they grew big, they'd become megabytes, you know, like the pun. Do you get it? Do you get it? But no, they're just called megabytes. There's no distinction between the two. Now that their tum-tums are nice and big and round, they no longer care about sucking you off anymore. Now they're putting up their dukes and just knocking the shit out of you with karate chops and ninja flips and shit. It's not a great thing to have in your way when you're slowly moving up and down stairs and no longer have your full range of mobility. Clearly, we would want to stop these things from getting big as soon as possible. So if your friend starts getting the sook, then your first instinct is obviously going to be to start firing wildly in your friend's direction. And as soon as you do, you'll be horrified to realize that the megabytes have left our corporeal realm and become intangible. Seriously, the obvious answer to these things would be to shoot them off, but for some reason you just can't do that. No, what you want to do is simply walk through a door with one of these things on you, which immediately knocks them off because they can't go through doors. So bullets don't work, but going through doors does. Why does the thing that feels like an unintended exploit work perfectly, but the thing that in any sane world would explode a hole into these monsters not work at all? Oh, and don't forget that as a giant bug, they're obligated to also inflict poison, so that's fun as always. They don't even feel that unique compared to other monsters in these games. Like, yeah, they're fleas, so they're attracted to blood, so you can drop a blood pack to distract them. But you could do that with the leeches, so that's not unique, that's not new. Outbreak, you're just repeating yourself at this point. I think it's pretty clear that due to their more inconvenient spawns, greater mobility, and proclivity to poison you, the megabytes being present in the tunnels is far more dangerous than the zombies. So you'd probably want to get as much done as possible in the passages before heading back to the train car and dooming everything to flee hell. And this is incredibly easy to do, actually. The problem is that the game doesn't make that clear on the first playthrough. Once you get that first bust, a check is set to have an oncoming train crash and explode on the tracks right next to our means of escape. It fills the entire area with smoke and fills your virus gauge really fast, so sticking around there no longer becomes viable. To stop it, you just fix a pipe and then turn the water back on in the passages. Then the sprinkler activates, revealing the second bust right next to the destroyed train, because I guess it was taking a ride on it, and it's just a massive stroke of luck that it crashed next to us when it did. It doesn't make any sense really, but it's a fine sequence of events from a gameplay standpoint. But what's notable about it is just how much easier this entire scenario becomes after you know what to expect. You can almost completely avoid encountering the megabytes and cut your playtime in half. All you have to do is just not leave the passages and get everything done in one go. None of the other chapters have this drastic of a difference between your first and second playthrough, and it really contributes to how forgettable this chapter becomes on replays. But we aren't done just yet. We have one more thing to take care of. Once the train is disconnected and we head towards the controls to get out of here, a flea bigger than anything we've seen so far breaks through the window and pulls out a random player, then takes them to the goopy part of the tracks. It's a little bit interesting that a single player is forced to tackle the boss all on their own before the others manage to catch up with them. But it doesn't take very long for anybody to just step outside and run down the tracks. And technically, the abducted player can just leave if they wanted to. Seems like you guys had an idea there, but you didn't go all the way for it. But this will be the final boss of Underbelly. And don't worry, they do indeed continue the wordplay by naming it Gigabyte. Giga here likes to stand in one place while all his little flea minions do the majority of the work. Every so often he'll call another enlarged megabyte to join his forces, but more important is the attack that sends out a wave of bouncing bambinos to knock players down like bowling pins. What a wonderfully ridiculous attack that helps Gigabyte stand out at least a little bit from the other bosses in these games. Aside from that, Gigabyte just has a few basic swipes and a sort of shuffle that lets him move back and forth. For the most part, it's a very immobile boss that doesn't actually deal damage itself, but more deals damage by sending out minions to help it. And it's a bit similar to Oscar in the sense that it's tanky if fought without any considerations, but it can be taken out much faster if you can figure out its weaknesses. It's got some obvious stuff like not liking fire and acid rounds. I find that most living creatures generally don't like being set on fire covered in acid, but unique to both it and most bug-based enemies in the the game, it carries a weakness to the pesticides that have been strewn around every level. Usually David just uses those things to make the fire spray combo weapon, but here they live up to their intended purpose, killing disgusting bugs. And in a level where 95% of the zombie population is replaced with disgusting bugs, it really shines. Just be sure to actually try and hit Gigabyte in his head region, since it does seem to do dramatically less damage anywhere else. Again, that's probably something that you're not going to figure out on your own. It's something that you probably got to learn or be told, which I'm not a huge fan of. Gigabyte just takes a little bit of time to learn and understand his attacks, but he isn't very mobile or aggressive enough to make him a genuine threat, at least on normal difficulty. This fight isn't anywhere near my favorite in either of the two Outbreak games, but you know, I've seen worse. Looking at you, giant leech. Get the fuck out of here. Right after Gigabyte dies, the train that we put so much effort into freeing suddenly becomes self-aware and threatens to drive away, leaving any stragglers or weak links behind. This is once again another alternate ending option. The easy one is just running back to the train and leaving without any additional fuss, after which we get the standard ending cutscenes.
I'm the only one around here that knows anything about the subway. They think we can get out of town this way? Shit. The subway don't go nowhere but down.
I guess I have no choice but to take out my frustration on these goddamn zombies.
I'll tell you what, this crap is getting old real quick.
I'm not sure if getting back in time was supposed to be difficult or something, because it really isn't a long or dangerous run back. It feels like this should be some kind of challenge where you have to make one final push through hell and high water in order to be rewarded with the faster ending. But in practice, it's just turning around and running in a straight line for a bit. And if you want the other ending, you basically have to go out of your way to miss the train. Once the train gets sick of waiting for you and leaves your ass behind, you can find a key where it was parked that'll force you to run through the entire level one more time. But this time with more. Again, it feels like this is supposed to be a punishment for not completing a non-existent challenge. Like, uh-oh, did dipshit baby miss their train? Then enjoy running through dozens of megabytes one more time. Again, the idea is there, I can see it, but it's not fully fleshed out. And I don't see any reason to go out of my way to do this alternate route, unless you're going for 100% completion, because there really isn't anything new to see. They just spam fleas and ladders everywhere in order to drag the game out a little bit longer. They turn this back area into like a maze of ladders, and climbing up and down ladders is so incredibly slow. It doesn't feel like there's any actual thought put into where the fleas are. They're just everywhere now, and it isn't very hard to just herd them around so they don't bother you. It's neat that they would include something like this, but it really could have been done better. Even the alternate endings for this route offer nothing unique or remarkable.
Here we go again. I'm getting a little sick of this. Well, no time for complaints. We gotta push on and do what we need to do to get the hell out of here.
Be the first on the scene. That's the cardinal rule of journalism. Or to put it another way, scoop or be scooped.
The city reeks of blood and rotting flesh. No matter where you go, you hear those things moaning. I'll take their invitation and cut them a new asshole if that's what they're after.
So overall, I think Underbelly is a really middling scenario. It's a fairly boring environment with standard experiences, and the most unique things about the game can be ignored with optimal gameplay. It's pretty neck and neck with Below Freezing Point in terms of not being that remarkable, except even Freezing Point managed to pull off more interesting ideas, like actually having the balls to split up teams for the first bit of the game, and a frozen laboratory is way more interesting than generic subway hallways. That said, it still isn't an outright bad scenario, and actually pulling off everything you need to do before the megabytes arrive can be rewarding. Regardless, I'm going to be putting it under Below Freezing Point. So we had one really good chapter and one really mid chapter. At this point, the next chapter could be anything. Next on the list is Flashback, a name that really only makes sense if you play one specific character, but we'll be getting into that shortly. It starts off with all of our characters stuck in some random cabin in the woods, and it takes no time at all for the cabin's owner to show up, wonder why a bunch of strangers are just chilling in his home, and then offer to lead them somewhere safe in the middle of the forest.
Let's hope no one gets hurt. It's not like there's a decent hospital around here after all.
Hospital?
Then it's off to the races as everybody follows this creepy old man through the woods and into his love shack while we dodge and weave through a new enemy type, the green zombie. So these are regular old zombies, except they got this big ugly flower growing out of their heads, making it look like they've been assimilated into some kind of undead pod person situation. They act just like any other zombie, with the only difference being this obnoxious spore cloud that will spray out of them after taking almost any kind of damage. Now that's just mean. This entire time, we've been taught that the best way to deal with infinitely spawning zombie hordes was to simply kick, tackle, and run around them. But now, this gets rid of our only resource-friendly means to get around these constant health hazards. It doesn't help that stray attacks, incompetent teammates, or blissfully idiotic AI companions can cause or be inflicted by the spores, which will of course poison you. This chapter loves its poison. It is all about poison. It is the Code Veronica of Outbreak scenarios. So killing these zombies requires a new approach. Either kill the thing from a distance, or get really good at baiting attacks and using dodge moves. It's kind of interesting as a change of pace. But besides them, the next big threat out here is just getting lost. Yeah, if you follow the old guy, then it's pretty easy to reach the hospital, but if you lag behind or take an alternate path to collect some items, then you're left to forage in the woods like a goddamn squirrel. Even Alyssa, who seems to be the designated gets slightly more screen time than everyone else in this chapter and this chapter alone character, ends up getting lost and just decides to live in the woods forever now. And I know this isn't the game's fault, but the widescreen mod really ends up fucking with me here. Certain camera angles end up showing a bit more of the surrounding background elements than the game expects you to be able to see. So when I cross certain camera angles and the background filler clips into the pathing in a way that makes it look like a wall, it really throws me off when it comes to determining where I can and can't go. But as long as you don't just keep running around in circles, then it shouldn't take too much time and effort to reach a drawbridge that leads to an abandoned hospital. And here is where the real level begins. We are almost immediately greeted by yet another stalker enemy type. Resident Evil, this is the 7th week in a row that you've shown stalkers in class. You can tell that they really fell in love with that game mechanic since half of all Outbreak levels have it in them, which once again makes these games not so different from modern releases. It's just stalker enemies everywhere, all the time. This also will not be the last time that we see one in this game, but this will be the last time that it plays a central role throughout the entire level. This is Axeman, a psycho serial killer that will be chasing us down through every floor of the hospital. Wait a second. Stalker enemy, hospital, multiple floors. This is just Leechman. We're doing Leechman again. Or rather, this might be an attempt to do Leechman right. Leechy was kinda lame as a stalker since he never actually posed that much of a threat in the Hive scenario in File 1. He was slow to move around and could be easily stun locked into submission with simple kicks and tackles. And that's when you aren't just using his inherent weakness to dumping B positive all over the floor in order to stick him in timeout for a bit. None of those same weaknesses have been carried over to Axeman. If he catches wind of you, then he will outright sprint after you and catch up in no time. And these much narrower hallways means that it's not uncommon for him to completely block your path and force you into a confrontation. Stun locking is much less viable since it takes things that actually deal a reasonable amount of damage to do so here, though you are rewarded with him temporarily running away if you decide to waste ammo on him. And it's pretty surprising he's as bulky as he is, considering that he looks like just a guy. But aside from that, I don't think that dealing with him is that obnoxious or difficult at all. At the very least, I'm just glad that the stalker enemy isn't constantly making me bleed anymore. Oh, what's that? Oh, his axe does cause you to bleed? Oh, okay, so it is just the Hive again. They're doing the Hive again. Onto the level itself, which just like the Hive takes place inside of a hospital, but this time it distinguishes itself much more by having a large focus on a greenhouse-inducing infestation by a T-virus riddled superplant. Vines are bursting from everywhere through walls, floors, and even zombies' heads. At this point, it seems like the hospital isn't even standing on its own legs. It's like the plant is propping it up, and that skeletal system might even have a mind of its own as it blocks paths that you try to escape into. This gives the level itself a greater identity compared to the Hive, which was really just a normal hospital with a few more leeches than you'd expect to find there. But the level design itself isn't as distinct. It mostly just consists of a few dead ends, but it's mostly defined by the need to clear plant tumors using the very conveniently not V-jolt located in the basement, next to this horrible chlorophyll-fueled room of death. Once one of these tumors is killed with a refillable syringe, it almost always leads you down a straight path to the next one. And once they're all dead, then the core of the plant reveals its plantussy to the world, which then leads into the boss fight. It's a pretty linear level, which isn't the best for survival horror, but as a brief standalone experience, I think it ends up serviceable. I feel like most of my enjoyment of the scenario just comes down to the plant theming. As we maneuver through this nearly collapsed hospital ruin, seeing these outlandish formations that have developed from it, and working our way past these giant flowers that periodically spray out poisonous spores, you get to observe a level's identity that we've never seen before. You can kill those plants with fire or chemicals, or just perfectly time your movements like a professional. So while it's really simple, there is a little bit of mastery to develop here. But besides that, it's just occasional encounters with green zombies, giant wasps, or the Axeman, who can sometimes insta-kill you in various ways. Nothing that special in terms of gameplay, but the vibes make up for it quite a bit. And the other thing that this chapter really has going for it is that it might be the most story-heavy scenario in all of File 2. Hell, maybe even both games. I think it seems a little odd to blow your load on chapter 3 out of 5, but hey, I'll take what I can get. So it turns out that the hospital built in the middle of nowhere with no clear business motive for doing so was secretly being used by Umbrella for injecting various chemicals into sick people. Who would have guessed? What's weird about it though is that the hospital itself wasn't built by Umbrella. It was already there. Somebody somewhere thought that building a hospital in the middle of the woods was a great idea, and then Umbrella sent over the mystery drugs for corrupt doctors to put into people. The head of this operation was none other than the creepy old man himself, Albert Lester, which kind of sounds like Albert Wesker if you really slur your speech. That's not important, I just think it's weird that they made the name so similar. Al Lester accepted bribes from Umbrella to test various drugs on patients, but it became personal when his wife, Dorothy, became terminally ill. Al, in what I guess was an act of desperation, injected the mystery drugs into his dying wife, despite the previous patient dying within a week from it. Like, yeah, it did cure his cancer cells, but it also fucking killed him, so it's not a great track record. But you know what they say, desperate times call for... Oh shit, wait, that doesn't work, it's the wrong one. When the mystery drug was injected into Dorothy, it seemed to work, with her status improving dramatically with no side effects except for an excessive appetite. That is, until she suddenly zombified and ate a reporter. After that, the hospital shut down and was abandoned by everyone except Lester, who discovered a mutant plant growing in the ICU. And at that point, he just said, "I guess this plant is my wife now." He then started feeding it animals, but when that wasn't enough, he moved up to people that he found in the woods, as he hunted them down with an axe. This is also around the same time that he developed superpowers, even being capable of tanking a shotgun blast without feeling a thing. And that's where we come in, as Lester has lured us into his hospital with the intention of feeding us to his plant wife. But it isn't just about wacky ol' Lester the Molester. As I briefly touched upon early in this section, Alyssa is given the primary focus here, and playing as her reveals additional information about the hospital and herself through flashbacks. Oh, that's why they called it the thing that only she can perceive while exploring. You see, that reporter that got eaten by Dorothy was Kurt, a journalist that Alyssa was working with back when she was a rookie, as they tried to expose the unethical experiments taking place here. We know how that ended up, but we learned that Alyssa came in right after the event and found her colleague being eaten. After that, she was apparently brainwashed or repressed all the memories? I don't know. First Yoko, now Alyssa. Everybody gets memory loss. You get memory loss, and you get memory loss. Memory loss for everyone. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that this is really good storytelling. It's just different from the rest of the Outbreak games because it's actually telling a story. This is without a doubt the height of Outbreak's narrative, which isn't exactly saying anything since most of the game puts no effort into that category, and the stuff with Yoko in File 1 ended up going nowhere. At least here there seems to be some kind of closure for Alyssa, in an attempt to humanize the axe murderer that's been chasing us around. And his story comes to a close when we finish killing the final boss, that being the giant plant that he named after his dead wife. I do not like this boss fight. It seems like it was designed with the intention of overwhelming and annoying players. The obvious weak point to attack is the Plantosi that opened up, but getting to it is easier said than done. There are vines and leaves everywhere that'll grab anyone who walks by and annoyingly hold them in place for a period before letting them go and almost immediately getting ready to attack again. Because of the fixed camera angles and their unusual placements and hitboxes, it's hard to determine what exactly you're going to hit with a weapon or where the range of the attack actually lies. So a lot of this fight is just learning where exactly is safe to walk and attack. But even if you do find a safe spot, hitting the plant's weak point will cause rocks to fall and displace players, so you can't comfortably stay in one place forever. It's really aggravating to play casually. The upside is that we get a ton of options to take the plant down. Somewhere in the hospital you can find what is presumably one of Lester's axes, and it is an extremely powerful melee weapon that really knocks around anything you swing it at, including plants and plant accessories. The other option we have is filling up bottles with whatever we were injecting to kill it, and then just throwing it at anything plant-based. Or fire if you have it. Pokemon taught me that fire is super effective against grass. Despite being pretty loaded with means to kill the thing, the fight just isn't fun. You're either being thrown around constantly, or you're perfectly timing dodges and standing in one place. I still think I'd call the giant leech a worse boss fight, but this isn't great either. But with the plant dead, we can escape through the back door just around the corner. Before we do though, we can unlock one more cutscene, which is required to perfect Alyssa's secret ending as well. While perfectly positioned rocks continue to constantly fall on our head, making reading this fucking journal impossible. Fuck you, game. Lester will try to finish us off one last time. If we beat him up and force him to run away, then he'll go back to the plant which spat out his wife's body, and he'll choose to embrace her while the building collapses onto both of them.
So there you are, my dear. My dear Dorothy. I'll never leave your side again.
And with everything taken care of, we can escape to finish the chapter.
That hospital's experiments were more than just human rights violations. They were crimes against nature itself. Kurt, your sacrifice won't be in vain. I'll escape this damn town alive and spread the truth about what happened.
So that's the main portion of Flashback. It's a level that lives and dies on its vibes. Most aspects of it aren't that remarkable and just serve as a passable scenario that engages you just enough to keep you playing through its somewhat short playtime. But damn if axe-wielding murderer chasing you through an overgrown hospital isn't an awesome premise. It's also nice to have some sort of story to engage with. Good or bad, it doesn't really matter. I'm just glad that they're actually trying here. So I think I can say that I liked it. I liked Flashback. But before we conclude it, we have one more thing to talk about: the alternate route. Flashback goes harder on the whole player choice idea more than anything we've seen yet, by allowing completion of the chapter by never even entering the main portion of the game. After Lester encourages us to follow him into his home to meet his plant girlfriend, we can instead choose to live in this little cabin for the rest of our lives instead. So if we stand around here doing nothing for 15 minutes? Oh my... God fucking damn it, why do these games keep testing me with longer and longer wait times? It's not fun, it's not hard, it's just wasting my fucking time. Okay, you wait around for 15 minutes without crossing the bridge that leads to the abandoned hospital, and the bridge breaks completely on its own for no clear reason at all. Now we're stuck on the forest side of the map and have to find a different way out of here. Somehow the paths outside have changed, allowing access to a riverbank and a completely different bridge that is absolutely infested with green zombies and giant wasps. Not only that, but the green zombies that were everywhere on the path have now been replaced with scissor tails. So here we are needing to get past all these threats with just the weaponry that our characters came equipped with. How are we gonna accomplish this? Well, yet another person seems to have snuck into Lester's cabin, and she claims to have lost her child somewhere in the woods. This is also a great opportunity to show off the new ability introduced in File 2, where our ad-libs will now interact with NPCs found within levels. Nothing too special, but it's a nice addition for a bit more player interactivity with the ad-lib system that wasn't very useful to begin with. Anyways, this woman will ask us to go find find her daughter Lucy and to show off a pendant in order to gain her trust. So we run through the forest maze that all looks the same, and we find Lucy by the river. We tell her to go find a cabin all on her own without any protection or direction, and then we run all the way back in order to reunite the two. After which, the woman will give us a special weapon to help us fight our way through the crowds. Of course, this means running through the maze one last time before simply crossing a bridge and boom, all done. Okay, so this is kind of terrible. It's another one of those things that these Outbreak games love to do, where after beating the game, you learn about all these extra details that you had no idea existed, which make this game so unique. And then you actually do this extra content and you see how shallow it is and just left with this feeling of, oh, well, I guess it's cool they put in the effort to include something like this, but you never actually want to do it again. It's always just a little tidbit for YouTubers to put in their video to describe how much content this game has. But I guess God forbid that we actually go in depth and tell people about how fucking boring it is. It's 15 minutes of waiting, which should be completely inexcusable on its own, but then you get to run around through the worst part of the scenario, except with even more annoying enemies blocking your path and jumping onto you from off screen. Then if you want to do everything that this chapter has to offer, you have to run back and forth at least 3 times through this shit, only to be given a low ranking and as unsatisfying of an ending as any of the others.
We spent almost a whole day out there in the woods. It turned out that we had no choice but to go back to town. But I can't give up hope now. Not after all I've gone through.
I'm sorry, this is awful. To the point that I would be saying that, yeah, the game would be better off if this didn't exist. You gain nothing from playing through this yourself, and the conditions to even start it are fucking ridiculous. At least give us an option to begin the alternate route without having to wait 15 minutes. Maybe we can shoot the bridge to destroy it early or something, but then that open up trolling opportunities, and this still means you have to run through the maze one more time. The first time me and my friends tried to do this route, we were genuinely unsure if we were doing something wrong, or if the game has bugged out because of how long it takes the bridge to collapse. Guides online were needlessly vague. Some of them said we needed to run all the way to the hospital and then run back. Some said to never leave the cabin, and no one had an exact time frame for how long you had to wait. So we had to figure all of this out all on our own. And it's just an awful experience. And the only reason this chapter isn't being lambasted further for it is because it's obviously not the intended way to play it. So, ignoring this stupid alternate route, I'm going to be putting Flashback above the Hive on my ranking. It has a lot in common with the Hive, but generally does everything it did, but slightly better. Better stalker enemy, better visuals, no emphasis on bleed. It's just better. So let's hope that the next chapter keeps up the momentum and doesn't have a stupid alternate route. Desperate Times is scenario number 4, and we have a quota of fan service to fulfill, so this one will be taking place right inside the RPD, and feature plenty of familiar characters from Resident Evil 2. Surprisingly, our characters aren't even the focus here in the introductory cutscene. Instead, we see Marvin Branagh, along with a handful of other RPD officers, trying to figure out a means to escape the current predicament that they're in. Since the RPD was originally a museum, and that for some reason translates to a puzzle-filled funhouse, they figure out that a small hole is located underneath the Justice statue in the foyer. We just need to figure out how to open it up. Simple enough. And this leads to all the players who spawn in different locations. I'm very glad to see that this chapter has the balls to do what Underbelly was afraid of doing. And it ends up working out great here because Desperate Times level design is pretty enjoyable. So this level is clearly going to be using the same general layout of the RPD that we saw in the original Resident Evil 2 and 3, but it ends up only using a portion of the entire location. It strategically cuts up the building like a Dead by Daylight map in order to create a smaller, more digestible floor plan, as well as introducing a few loops and obstacles that help it stay cohesive and challenging. Everything is connected in a way that allows a solo player to do everything that they need to do, but if you get a full party in here, it's awesome to see everybody split up and do their respective tasks and reconnect areas based on where they spawn. Spread around the building are various colored plates that all need to be brought back to the Justice statue. Each plate is in a unique position of being near other keys or useful secrets, close or far from the foyer, or needing extra work to acquire like codes. Or in a surprise appearance from everybody's favorite soon-to-be corpse, Ben Bertolucci, we need to trade with him Secret Files, which contains Chief Brian Iron's internet history, as well as how much he spent on OnlyFans and gacha games, information that would undoubtedly dismantle Umbrella. Each player would be able to comfortably go after whatever plate is closest, each dealing with their own dangers or puzzles, maybe even being able to set up other players to be able to collect their plates. It's a really interesting way to have everyone work together, but it's special because even when you're playing it solo, it gets your brain working on the most efficient way to collect everything with a minimal amount of backtracking. I like it a lot. They did a great job reworking this iconic map into something new, and my enjoyment is somewhat remarkable because the chapter really is just working with good level design. There are no unique enemies or stalkers or anything like that, just zombies, which is normal, lickers, which can be easily avoided, and dogs, which are located in one room and one room alone. Well, there is one thing unique about this scenario, and it seems to be universally hated.
Caution. Warning. Caution. Warning.
As you explore, various rooms will cycle through deadly nerve gas that is for some reason being released into them. There's only one note that mentions the gas, but it only describes it as being used to update the station's security. So I'm not exactly sure why we are dealing with it. Did the gas leak out of their canisters? If so, then why is it moving from room to room? So that means it's a security system malfunction, right? But then why would they have their own offices programmed with the ability to spread deadly neurotoxin like they're fucking GLaDOS or something? How often do these people need to incapacitate an entire room, let alone locations that are primarily occupied by officers? This doesn't make any fucking sense. But you know everybody would be willing to forgive it if it made up for it by having a unique and interesting gameplay mechanic tied to it. Unfortunately, it doesn't get much better from here. When you're in one of these gassed rooms, you will take gradual damage, which is bad enough, but the real threat is that your virus gauge absolutely skyrockets. On higher difficulties, if you stay in one of these rooms for a bit too long, you could be completely ruining your chance to finish the chapter before dying to the infection. The virus gauge is already one of the mechanics that newcomers are really upset about having to deal with, and here you go making it infinitely worse. The way you get around it is by using one of the gas neutralizing canisters that are spread around, which shuts off gas for that room cycle. But as the difficulty goes up, these become rarer and rarer. So at that point, the alternative is to just eat an herb to gain its temporary antiviral effects for the few seconds that you're in the room. Technically, you can do this on any difficulty, but new players aren't going to be aware of stuff like this. This is something that you have to learn on your own. It's not taught to you. Similarly, you are able to predict where the gas is going to go next based on the selected difficulty, but yeah, no thank you. I'm not gonna remember all that. I'm just gonna eat the herb. It's not a very fun mechanic, and I can safely say that if it was removed from the scenario entirely, I would not be missing it. I don't think it adds anything to the experience. And like I said, it seems to be universally hated. Not only does it not make sense in the world, but it also serves to make the experience worse as a whole. So after all the running around and collecting, we managed to open up the secret passage underneath the statue, and Marvin sends in Rita, the smallest officer present, inside to check it out, and hope that this complex mechanism doesn't just trap her or suffocate her or crush her or spit her out somewhere that's equally unsafe. I guess it's better than just sitting around and waiting to die. Apparently she did get somewhere safe and she finds another officer driving an armored vehicle, so they begin heading back to pick everyone up. Marvin steps outside and then is immediately bitten by a zombie, thus sealing his fate into Resident Evil canon. And from this point on, it's a race to collect as much ammo and firearms as possible in order to fend off the oncoming horde. At least, that's what you'll discover if you're like me and you activate the final sequence not realizing what it is, and then get completely destroyed by what seems like an endless amount of zombies. What the game intends for you to do is to take this last bit to run around the map one more time to find as many resources as possible. Then you bring them back to the entrance for later use. There are a few new things to collect, like trading film reels with Ben, who is apparently ridiculously armed and was allowed to keep all of these weapons in his cell. There's also some boards that can be put onto the front gate in order to give yourself some more time. But if you're playing solo, then there's just no benefit to running all that distance just for an extra 3 minutes of exploration time. Just running to the roof alone probably ate up that time already, and that's not considering if you got hurt or anything. What's weird though is that this is another one of those situations where you really have to understand Outbreak's mechanics and see what they're trying to give you. All across the entrance are items, but it is crucial that you do not just pick them up and use them. No, what the game wants you to do is to use these as a makeshift item storage. This area is just begging for a Resident Evil 0 style drop items anywhere system, but that's not how this game works. So you have to pull out your inner alchemist and perform an equivalent exchange for any guns and ammo you need to save later. If you pick something up, then always leave something behind, or that's just one spot that gets erased from existence. The kind of thing that is not intuitive at all, and you really have to figure it out by knowing this game inside and out. And trust me, these weapons are critical for this final sequence. Once the designated amount of time is passed or a player activates this early, all the players are then forced into the front gate, which bursts open and zombies begin flooding in. And then it becomes an all-out fight for survival. Alright, so nice things first. The set piece is indeed exciting. With a bunch of friends, this is a really chaotic sequence where everybody is fighting back to back just to mow down as many enemies as possible, something that we don't really get an opportunity to do anywhere else in either Outbreak game. For those of you who love your action sections in these games, this is made for you. Problem is that these games are not great for big combat-centered encounters. These are survival horror games first, so evasion, limited ammo, and slow, awkward combat are a defining factor of the classic Resident Evil games. A skirmish like this ends up just looking like a few characters standing around and effortlessly using auto-aim to mow down enemies. The limited ammo thing is pretty annoying too. Like I said before, it's easier than you'd hope to softlock yourself here if you don't have the ammo or guns needed to not just survive, but kill enemies. Yeah, this isn't a timed ordeal. You can't just wait it out. You have to kill a specific number of enemies. If it was timed, then you could just fall back on the classic survival horror strategy of evasion. It would still be pretty difficult considering the number of zombies present at one time, and killing them all instead of waiting the timer out could be seen as a reward for being so prepared. But no, you have to kill them. You have to have all the guns needed. And if you don't, then you'll be left tackling them to death, which is in no way viable. At a certain point, you need to start using the weird mechanics to your favor, like how sitting right in front of the entrance, or even in the corners, gives you a surprising amount of freedom to pick at enemies from a distance, since their AI seems to have trouble locating you from here. It's not a perfect solution, but if you're playing this solo, it's easy to become incredibly overwhelmed, so you need every advantage that you can get. So I'll give it this. Completing the sequence on very hard solo is a very rewarding experience from a challenge perspective. That said, this is still really out of place in a game like this, and it needs a lot of reworking in order to be easier to understand. For instance, how about just a table or something here where players can put down weapons and health as opposed to having to constantly trade shit back and forth. Something as simple as that would have made it so much more accessible to people outside of the Outbreak-obsessed fans who know this game like the back of their hand. But after surviving the hordes, Rita finally pulls up and picks up all the survivors. All except for Marvin, who chooses to stick around after being bitten in order to distract the zombies and accept his fate. Nicely setting up how we'll find him in Resident Evil 2. Then, as they drive away, the characters do their little spiel.
You don't need to worry about him, Rita. He was born to be a cop. It'll take a lot more than that to stop a tough guy like him. Hell, we haven't even finished training the new recruits yet.
And that's Desperate Times. I can understand why a lot of people would put this chapter so high on their ranking. Fan service seems to be a generally easy way to win people over. Just look at Resident Evil 9's reception. But that stuff doesn't work on me. Like, yeah, it's pretty cool to be able to see something that was once rendered as pre-rendered backgrounds now be actually rendered on the PlayStation 2. But if given the option, I think I'd rather see something new than something I've already seen before. So I'd be looking at this from more of a gameplay-oriented view. And in that regard, it does a pretty good job for most of it. The search for the colored plates is great. And even the additional search for as much firepower as possible is fun too. It's just a shame that they had to include this stupid gas mechanic that kind of makes everything slightly less fun. The final battle makes for a hell of a set piece, especially with friends. I just wish that if you're going to focus on a combat-oriented sequence, then the combat itself would be engaging enough to hold it up. It's a similar issue I had with Resident Evil 3, where I'd prefer a survival horror game to either go all horror or all action, and not try to be both. Part of what makes a good game is knowing where its strengths lie. Sometimes your game is just not cut out for certain things. Regardless of all that though, I still really like Desperate Times. I think I prefer Wild Things and Decisions more, but it ends up getting the bronze on my completely subjective ranking list that means nothing to anybody other than myself. So let's see how this game caps everything off with the final scenario. After all the other chapters have been completed, we unlock the only hidden scenario that isn't immediately available from the start. End of the Road will serve as the final chapter to cap off the entire Outbreak series of games, so the expectations are high. Not only that, but Decisions left a pretty good taste of what these final scenarios can offer, so I was pretty excited going in. The first thing we see is an Umbrella Secret Service member arguing with an Umbrella employee about leaving Raccoon City.
Let me go!
No! It's way too dangerous to go back now.
I left something very important back there. Trust me when I say it's gonna be a big help to us later. I promise I'll be back before you know it.
Fine, but I'm not waiting long.
Fair enough. Thank you.
After she runs back to an Umbrella facility, she runs into another employee alongside David King for some reason. Like, there really is no explanation as to why he's in this facility. He's just here because they're filling out their quota again. At least George had a personal connection to the scientists at Raccoon University and Decisions. David seems to just be here so they can cross him off the list of playable characters in cutscenes, more similar to Cindy in Wild Things. But as the final chapter of the game, I thought we would have gone a little bit harder than this. Anyways, the two employees begin to catch up, with both of them being here to collect a potential sample of the T-virus cure. But of course it wouldn't be a lab level if there weren't horrible monsters breaking out of their containment at the exact same time we arrived. The man, named Carter, runs ahead to check out what the problem is, and the woman, named Linda, seems to run into the room next door and immediately locks us out of it for some reason. That's kinda weird, but let's begin the level. We very quickly discover what caused the alarms to set off. Hunter R's make a return and begin chasing us throughout the facility. Oh, wait, my bad. These are Hunter... shit, how do you pronounce that? Muse? Okay, wait, no, these are slightly smaller versions of the Hunter R's. So that means it's basically translated to Hunter Micros. Doesn't really matter though, because look at them. They're just a slightly smaller Hunter R. Look, I can do it too. This is my original character, Leon Micro. They're doing the exact same thing they did with the fleas, except now it's with the hunters that they already created. The game is basically inbreeding in order to make new monsters. These things have the exact same moveset as the Hunter R's in Below Freezing Point, except I swear they upped their aggression here. I don't know if it's just because I encountered more of them here, or if there was a genuine change to their programming, but they seem to give me a lot more trouble in this game. They'll run after me and do side swipes more often, and in Freezing Point, they would just let me run around them while they stared off into space. I wouldn't be surprised if they heard some feedback from File 1 and made some changes here, but I'm not certain of anything. Still though, if you give them a wider berth than you're used to and don't fuck up opening doors, then you should be fine. As for the labs themselves, this is a painfully boring series of rooms. The pathing just leads you down a single long line that only occasionally turns around. Just keep moving forward until you hit a dead end, then you turn around and repeat. It's so thoughtless and boring. You look at the map and you're like, oh man, this place looks huge. But then you actually pace out what your path looks like and there's little to no exploration taking place here. You just run straight through it. In other words, it's linear as hell, even on the first playthrough. It's not inherently a bad thing, I guess. I enjoyed Flashback for what it was. But here, the only brainpower being used is to stay away from the hunters that infinitely spawn, making them worthless to fight or kill. It's just get to the next door, with no monster variety or variation. Very mindless gameplay so far. After exploring the labs for a bit, we run into Carter again, who has a plan for the rampant hunters patrolling the halls. We help him find the MO disc that he needs, and he activates a unique subspecies of tyrant, known as a Tyrant R, because that's all they do now. If they make a new creature, they just put an R on it. This thing apparently has the ability to be programmed with specific targets in mind. So we unleash it onto the hunters and let it do its work.
He's not my favorite choice for a bodyguard, but oh well.
No need to worry. He knows who his masters are. I packed in a special little present. So if worst comes to worst, tall, dark, and ugly is ground zombie meat.
With the Tyrant on our side, we move through the remaining rooms, letting him deal with any of the monsters that might bother us, which is a pretty neato idea. We've been on the receiving end of a Tyrant's hunt, so it's cool to see a Tyrant work for us, and bash all these annoying enemies that kept fucking with us. Finally, we get to have the invincible Monster Man on our side. At least, That's what I would be saying if the game made him a bit more proactive when it comes to protection. What actually happens is he saunters forward at a slow pace while all the hunters completely ignore him and go for us. The hunter's aggression is primarily based on proximity. Whoever is closest to it is who they'll go after, which means that anybody who decides to take charge is going to be their priority. At least that seems to mostly be the case. I do have a few recorded incidents where the hunters would seem to just completely ignore the tyrant and go after me, so I'm not certain, but whatever. The tyrant here is taking his sweet ass time. He is absolutely in no rush to get anywhere, and sticking right next to him is incredibly boring and slow, which will almost inevitably mean that players will run ahead of him. So they just zero in on players, and all we can hope for is that they pass by the tyrant and receive a killing blow. What ended up happening for me was that I watched the tyrant fight a few hunters for a minute or so. Then when they kept spawning and coming after me, I realized it wasn't worth trying to make it all work. So the best bet was to just run ahead to the next objective. It's a cool thing to describe, but actual analysis of this really takes the excitement out. It's really wild to see other people's videos of this section and hear them describe how exciting and fan servicey it is, but then you watch their footage and the tyrant barely does anything, and the players are doing all the work. And then they conveniently leave out the part where it takes place for only about 3 rooms and for less than 5 minutes. It is so easy to please people. Carter manages to catch up to Linda, but unfortunately for him, the tyrant comes out of literally nowhere. As in, there is literally nothing behind that pipe. I have no idea how he was hiding or where he came from. And the tyrant turns on both of them for no clear reason, besides the obligation of a monster that was intended to be controllable turning on its creator. But aside from that cliche, I don't really see any reason why the tyrant turned on us now. The antiviral gets destroyed, and both Linda and the remote that could trigger a bomb inside the tyrant fall into the sewer below. And now we're in a much more familiar setting, running for our lives from a massive unkillable monster man. Haha, good times, am I right? We will eventually manage to escape into the sewers to find everything that fell down there, after we open a vent that I initially thought was just part of the background, and we take an elevator down. Here in the sewers, the gameplay doesn't really change all that much. It's still just as linear as ever, with the occasional obstacle that gets in the way, or weird stuff like this giant room that seems to be a maze intended to confuse new players on how to progress. Like, yeah, I'll give it that. It was certainly confusing on my first playthrough. I was a little bit disappointed when it ended up building up to nothing though, and then on every subsequent playthrough I would just run straight to the exit. Despite all this extra floor space, it still just ends up being a run to the end. Sometimes the tyrant is hunting us down, like in this instance where he falls from the ceiling and forces us to annoyingly run back a bit just so we can run around him. That's bad enough, but the optimal way to play against this guy is just one giant act of tedium. If you move too far ahead of him, then he'll begin to sprint at a faster speed than you can run, and then he'll cause damage by just colliding with you. It's such an annoying attack. You have to maintain this perfect distance from him so you aren't close enough to get hit, but you're also not too far to trigger its sprint, which is dramatically slower than just running straight to the door. It's not hard, it's just slow, and I don't enjoy it. In the sewers is also arguably the biggest alternate route in the game, and that's not exactly a good thing. None of them have been a good thing so far. Eventually we run into Linda, who awakens from being knocked unconscious, but before we can find a means to get out of there, a flood of water is released for no reason, and it washes us all away to another part of the sewers. Just once again, there doesn't seem to be any explanation for why things are happening. We'll just have to chalk it up to us being the most unlucky bastards on the planet. Anyway, the part of the sewer that we get washed up to is the part from the original Outbreak scenario in File 1. This is now an area that we see in Outbreak, we see in Hellfire, and now we're seeing it in End of the Road. They are really making the most out of their limited resources, aren't they? I could get all nitpicky about how bizarre it is that this is the location that we ended up, but instead let's focus on that alternate route I mentioned. Anybody currently in the room with Linda will get washed away, but if you happen to be left behind, then you have to find another route out of the sewers. And this requires quite a bit of backtracking and maneuvering through these confusing sewers before spitting you out at a completely different location than the rest of your team. In order for everyone to be together, you have to wait around for straggling players to catch up, which might be a little bit difficult if everybody playing this chapter is new to it like we were. What ended up happening to us was one player got left behind, and because we were all so overwhelmed by the massive massive level to begin with, we had no idea how to help our friend not only catch up, but just get out of the sewers in general. This feels less like a choice and more like a trap, designed to separate new players and possibly force them to start over. We kept going because we thought the end of the chapter was just around the corner, but knowing what I know now, we weren't even close to the end. So one friend was just completely left in the dust while two of us experienced the game. It's something that really soured my first experience playing this chapter, as if the previous levels being linear and boring weren't enough for me to reach that conclusion on my own. Okay, so back at the sewers in the Outbreak scenario. We climb out to immediately see Linda heading towards the Apple Inn.
This'll be the 99th rodent I kill. Wait a sec. I think that may be a live one. Well, fuck it.
What are you doing? Get the hell out there and find them! How long do you plan to just sit here and do nothing?
Okay, what the hell is happening now? This chapter's story is just like its level design in the sense that they just keep throwing new shit at us constantly. I don't know if it's just me, but on my first playthrough, so much was constantly happening that I had trouble keeping track of everything. It was information overload and I was just ready for the level to be over. First is Linda and the USS guy, then we're with David, Linda, and Carter, and then David just disappears and now Carter's dead. Now we're in the sewers and we're washed away to a completely different location. And then here's two new characters that are introduced that we never learned the names of, and we're only halfway in. Nothing is given enough time to breathe and let me understand what's going on. Okay, whatever. So this weaselly looking guy is upset that this UBCS guy isn't looking for somebody carrying a dangerous package. Most likely that USS guy with the pompadour at the beginning. Man, I hate that I have to just keep referring to everyone as guys because I don't know anything about them. At most, you can learn some of their names later in the scenario through notes. But in order to be less annoying, I'm going to tell you right now that this man is called Rodriguez, this one's Arnold, this one is Nielsen. And after looking like a badass by deafening Nielsen, Arnold casually walks away. Except he doesn't, because as soon as the game begins again, he's right back where he was, shooting at us just because he's an asshole, I guess. Thus begins yet another segment in this chapter that has already gone on too long, where we get to do everyone's favorite kind of quest, an escort mission. Not one of the good ones too. This is one where the escort has no self-preservation, moves painfully slow on her own, and heavily hinders your own movement if you try to help her. But that's not even the worst part of it, because right outside is a sniper who will 100% shoot you if you try to cross the street with her. If there is a way to authentically get her across on your own without getting hurt, then I have no idea how to do it. So I assume this is the game just wanting you to abandon her and then come back when it's safe. I've had about enough of this though, so I instead choose to use an obvious exploit to get past. Like, it's something that I figured out on my very first playthrough. It's not very well hidden. If you've played this game a decent amount, then you've probably become aware that certain animations make you invincible as you perform them. I brought this up in the first video, how pushing the cars made it to where you were completely invincible. And the exact same thing is carried over into this game, where you can see that the tyrant is completely incapable of hurting me as I push this crate. One of the animations like this happens to be whenever you lend a shoulder to an injured player. So if we periodically pick Linda up, walk a few steps, let her go, and then pick her up again right when we're about to be shot, we can just tank all of the dude's sniper rounds. I'd say that there's no way that this was intended by the devs, but at this point I have no idea what we're expected to be able to do or not do. Regardless, it is incredibly easy to figure out and incredibly easy to exploit. So if it isn't intentional, I'm surprised that it managed to get through testing. But we made it past that asshole, so now we have a new challenge. There are mines placed everywhere. Some of them are obvious, and some of them seem intentionally hidden in spots that make no logical sense in real life, but are perfectly hidden behind objects if we had, say, a fixed camera angle for our viewpoint. So this is just a slow process of inching forward, awkwardly aiming down at hidden claymores, hoping that you're far enough from the blast that you don't still get hit, and then repeating it for as many mines as you can find. For the ones you can't find, well... Then, after dodging some more zombies and mines, we reach an office building. Now, this building is going to be very important. Keep that in mind. But for now, let's just keep playing through the chapter like we would in a natural first playthrough. Just around the corner, we see Nielsen and Arnold getting into an argument once again.
They plan to contain the incident the old-fashioned way, by blowing blowing up the target location and everyone in it with missiles? Why didn't you say anything, you weasel?
I kept telling you to hurry!
Damn!
Oh!
Meanwhile, Rodriguez is getting the exact same news, thus triggering a countdown. Not for the destruction of the city, but rather for when Rodriguez is going to fly away, something that our characters would have no idea about. From here, we run forward into some alleyways, then we meet a familiar face. So why is this happening? What we know about tyrants is that they don't mutate unless they lose their inhibitor coat, but those usually always come off because they took extensive damage. Yeah, we have the option to take the tyrant out before this moment, but I didn't do that in this playthrough. Tyrant R has been untouched this entire time, so why is he turning into a fucking Geodude all on his own? Okay, whatever, now we're guiding an escort with a near impervious super tyrant hunting us, on top of a timer running out. What the fuck is happening? Super Tyrant R has many of the same annoying tendencies as his previous iteration. If you're too far away, then he will charge you and make you stumble. But now he also has a follow-up attack that he loves to do immediately after putting you in a stun state. Not just that, but he has this new move where he swings his arms all around, which instantly kills anyone it hits as long as they're facing in his direction. And to top everything else off, this area is full of stairs that will slow down your movement. Even if you weren't carrying a fucking brick of a person, this place will cut your speed down dramatically. Maybe with a full party this could be feasible. Or yes, if you're a skilled player who knows all the game's secrets, then you probably could have found a rocket launcher or something to be able to take the tyrant out. But even then, this entire sequence is asking for a lot. It is definitely possible to be able to get Linda there safely all on your own. I managed to do it here, but as you can see, it's cutting the time pretty close. This is something that you have to be really prepared for, so I really wouldn't recommend trying it on your own. If you're really desperate, then it's not that much harder for you to just ditch Linda and run for the chopper yourself. Even without her though, the tyrant is a pain in the ass with all these stairs, so hopefully you have a means to get rid of him. If you manage to make it to the chopper, then congratulations, you beat the scenario. And if you manage to get Linda there, then congratulations, you got the good ending. But that's not what happened on our first playthrough. So here we are. We took a little bit too long and we missed our ride. So I guess we'll just keep going on to see what lies ahead. We run past where the helicopter was and... Wait, what the hell? Is this a dead end? What the hell am I missing here? It just kept going straight. Oh my god, what does this game want from me? This was my first experience with End of the Road. If you haven't played the game before, I'm sure everything I did seemed like it made sense. I might not have played the game optimally, but we just kept moving forward through every accessible door in front of us, just like you would in any other scenario. And it led to a dead end. Well, it turns out that this is where the players who don't get washed away end up when they crawl out from the sewers. They're right next to the helicopter and Tyrant R spawns immediately next to them. That might explain why you can find a mine detector far away from where a majority of the mines are. But if this is just an alternate exit from the sewers, then where the hell do we go to finish the game after the helicopter flies away? Remember that inconspicuous building that I told you to remember? Well, whenever the timer runs out for the chopper, a random zombie breaks this door down, and this is where you're supposed to go. How was I supposed to know that? The correct answer was to just wait right after that cutscene in front of the door and stand around doing nothing. Once again, the Outbreak games have made the solution to just fucking wait through a timer. But because we didn't know that, we ended up running ahead through more mines and through an entire fucking super tyrant. We thought we were supposed to kill the super tyrant, and that ended up going nowhere. Like, I know a lot of people understand this game really, really well and know exactly what you were supposed to do, but I hope you can see my frustration. The game is painfully unclear when it comes to direction in this chapter, and dying and having to replay everything that we've done up to this point is just so miserable. But alright, we're almost done. Climb up the stairwell and then jump across to the highway. And here's an important tip if you're an idiot like me who doesn't know the correct timing on these little jump tests. If you fall, start mashing the action button like crazy. Even though it looks like nothing is happening, you will actually climb up. I have no idea why they couldn't have added an animation that looks like you were slowly climbing, because as is, this is awful. In other locations with this test, you can have another player help you up, but here they'll get locked into a boss fight as soon as they get up there. And if you end up hanging for too long, then yeah, that was fun to discover on my first playthrough, right at the final boss too. But everyone knows I'm an idiot, that's nothing new. What is new is what's waiting for us on this highway. You see, after Rodriguez flew away, Nielsen took things into his own hands and fired a rocket at the chopper, causing it to drop its payload and release what was inside.
What the?
Not only that, but Tyrant R has followed us up here, and then he gets absorbed by the flesh mass as well. The final result is a creature called Nyx. And finally, I get to be briefly positive about something in the chapter. The visual design of an amalgam monster consisting of fused human bodies alongside the Tyrant wriggling around inside of it makes for a really interesting creature. The way that you can still see hints of their original forms in his giant mutated arm is really unsettling, and considering that this thing formed from just a single squad, it makes you wonder just how big something like this could actually become. End of the Road has been constantly hinting towards whatever was inside this crate since the very beginning, and seeing it tear a squad of professional mercenaries into pieces and then assimilating it into itself is a really great setup. Not only that, but then it absorbs a Tyrant R, an incredibly powerful monster that never seems to stay down no matter how many times we killed it, and it just gets consumed in an instant by something completely out of its league. It's like saying, you know how this guy was scary? Well, it just got fucking ate by something bigger and scarier. And I love that. It really is a monster that is presented as the biggest and scariest thing that we have faced yet. I also love how it carries over the Tyrant's internal weakness all the way to this stage. You remember that remote that Carter dropped? It was supposed to explode something from within the Tyrant in order to kill it before it tries anything stupid. And up to this point, it could have been used once and only once anytime we ran into it. During its regular form in the sewers, during the Super Tyrant form in the streets, and yes, now during its absorption into Nyx. Being able to pick and choose when to use it is great, and it's rewarding to be able to save it all the way up until now. Unfortunately, I'm not able to be as positive when it comes to how Nyx generally plays. First are its basic attacks. While slow and lumbering, Nyx uses a lot of high-range moves that make up for its speed. Sweeps for right in front of it, these weird back tentacles for behind, a stomp that spreads tentacles all over the ground, and if you're too far away from it, then it'll shoot blobs that heavily increase your infection rate. Then it has this really cool special move where it just slams its arm down and absorbs the player into its body. At that point, said player is basically dead unless the boss is killed before they officially die. But what's an awesome detail is that the absorbed player can struggle from within Nyx to reveal its weak point and help their teammates kill the thing faster. If it was just dodging those attacks while unloading into it, then this could be a pretty solid boss fight, which is incredibly welcome in a duo of games with some pretty weak bosses. The problems arise when we get to actually taking the thing down. Nyx feels like it should be a lot simpler, but in practice, it is a boss with a complex set of rules to it. Doing it on your own, you might just assume that you deal damage until it falls on its knees and then reveals its weak spot. And if you're lucky, then that might work out for you. If you pick up the rocket launcher that's in a random car's trunk, you could have used it to immediately end the fight from that point on. But as the difficulty rises, you will almost definitely need to learn how this fight works in order to successfully deal damage. There are ways to insta-kill it in the same way that we were able to insta-kill Thanatos in the previous game, but it is slightly harder to accomplish in this game due to the number of zombies that stand in between you and Nyx. At least that's if you're playing it on solo. If you're playing it in a group, you can probably just do whatever. But if you don't come fully prepared, then you're going to need to know how to fight Nyx. And that means learning how this fight works in order to successfully deal damage. You see, Nyx has 3 different health bars, one for its legs, which once depleted means that it will fall down and be open for attacks. After it gets up, its legs heal with less and less health every single time, but constantly hitting it in the legs does nothing to actually kill it. That's where you need the second health bar, the heart. This is the one that actually kills it if it hits 0. Problem is that it's not always open, and it needs to be forced open by attacking the third health bar, the Tyrant. For some reason, the Tyrant's body is tied directly to the weird sphincter thing that is protecting the core, and the Tyrant needs to be specifically attacked in order to open it up. Now that's already a lot to learn, but we are only scratching the surface. There is so much more to consider. For instance, the Tyrant's health is directly correlated to how much damage the core takes. Lower health the Tyrant has, the more the core opens, and then it takes more damage. This simply means that if the core isn't completely open, then you're not dealing 100% damage. Now, can you tell me if this core is 100% open? What about this one? Little hard to tell if you don't know what you're looking for, isn't it? So even though the rocket launcher may be a one-hit kill, if the core isn't 100% open, you won't be dealing all of that damage, meaning that you'll have to finish the job with some other weapon. But as soon as the core takes any damage at 100%, the Tyrant will heal rapidly, causing you to have to repeat the process. If you attack the Tyrant at any time during its healing phase, then it will just re-heal all that damage you just dealt to it. So that means that it's best to wait for the Tyrant to fully heal so you don't waste any resources. And you know how I said that attacking his legs doesn't hurt his core? Well, it doesn't, unless you down him 12 times, in which case then it will decrease his max health dramatically. Isn't this shit just insane? Especially since none of it is obvious in the game in any way without tons of testing. Then on top of all that, we can throw in some really infuriating things, like how Nyx always seems to be moving away from where you want it to go, and sometimes it just puts its face into a wall so you can't get any good hits on him, or maybe it's just in a really inconvenient position where the camera doesn't get a good look at what you're hitting. There's also the unsure nature of fixed camera angles being paired up against 3 different health bars that are really close to each other. When I'm throwing these bottles at him, am I hitting the core? Am I hitting the Tyrant? Am I hitting his legs? Am I hitting all of them? What about this rocket launcher? Did that actually hit the core, or did I miss it? How am I supposed to know this stuff without massive amounts of trial and error? Nyx is so close to being a good fight. It just gets bogged down with all these additional mechanics that make it needlessly complex and confusing for new players. Admittedly, when you're aware of all of this, the fight can be pretty fun, but I shouldn't have to look up a 20-minute tutorial video on YouTube just to understand how to fight this thing. So unfortunately for me, it ends up being more of a negative than a positive. But with Nyx dead, we can turn around and move a piece of rubble that just looks like a bit of background clutter, and use it as a bridge for Linda to walk across and join us on the escape vehicle. You know, after we wait very slowly for her to walk all this way. And at that point, we finally completed End of the Road. Alright, ending time. If you recall from the last video, I thought most of the endings weren't that satisfying except for the paired bad endings, which were surprisingly effective, making good use of what little characterization we got from the cast, and ending the game with a delightfully bittersweet feeling. So do we get anything like that here? Nope. We get a bunch of generic endings like every other chapter has.
It's like a funky horror movie, complete with an explosive climax and a hold on to your seat ending. I wouldn't be surprised to hear some narrator's voice, but the fight was only the beginning. I don't want to have to put myself through this kind of zombie shit again. You only get one chance at life. True that, so I'm gonna spend the rest of mine having fun.
Jim once again proving to be the only character that I really want to see the cutscenes for. After that, we get a single universal bad end for you not saving Linda that basically says, yeah, that whole Raccoon City thing was really fucked up. Everyone disliked that.
The harsh reality may be that mankind lacks the power to close the book on this disaster once and for all.
The closest that we'd be looking for in terms of a satisfying conclusion would be the good endings, achieved by successfully saving Linda. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot to glean from them. I think the budget might have run out at this point or something because most of them aren't even fully animated. They resort to this slideshow effect that just looks cheap, and once again we can compare it to what we got in File 1 and the difference is obvious. Not that File 1 had extraordinary animation or anything, but it was actually animated. A majority of the endings here just show off our characters being happy and living their lives. Cindy buys a house, Mark gets to relax with his family, Jim gets to buy shoes. Fascinating stuff. There's nothing of substance here besides just seeing these guys happy, or whatever the hell David is feeling as he gets on a ship. Possibly the most important ones would be Alyssa and Yoko's ending. We see that Alyssa published her story and continued improving herself, which probably would have huge ramifications for the endgame world.
I'm fully aware of that, thank you very much. It's all about strength, physical strength.
That's literally everything that she says in the entire cutscene, and I don't know why. It sounds like it's beginning in the middle of a conversation that she's having with somebody else, but nobody else is in the cutscene, so I don't know what to make of that. But mainly I would have thought that this ending would have focused more on Alyssa's desire to continue exposing the truth after surviving Raccoon City. Instead, it seems a little bit more focused on her upping her gains. Not that that's not important when you're fighting giant mutant monsters, but it's just less in tune with what I'd expect from her character. And Yoko, after miraculously remembering everything suddenly at the very end,
as the town faded away, my memory came rushing back to me. All of it.
Goes to court with Linda to testify against Umbrella. And considering what happens in the very next game, this is possibly the most important cutscene of all. And that's about it. Nothing that blew me away like in File 1. Instead, this is more like a catharsis. After they've suffered so much, now they get to have happy endings, which might work for some people, but I think is really boring. Especially if you compare it to ideas like, I don't know, Kevin going out to take on Umbrella, or George becoming a leader and researching countermeasures against bioterror. Maybe Jim writes a book about his entire situation and gets a lot of money, but he might have made a few embellishments about himself in the story here or there. You know, something fun like that. Just something a little bit more than just he buys shoes. Also, what the hell is with these logos constantly covering up the scene? Is this seriously where we had to put these things? I don't know what a majority of these companies did, but I highly doubt that it's so important that I need these fucking companies covering up everybody's faces. Look at this shit. Have you no decency? Well, considering that's how we end the chapter, my feelings about it are probably pretty clear at this point. I hate End of the Road. I have played through 10 scenarios up to this point, and this is the first and only time that I can outright say I did not have a good time playing the scenario. Even Hellfire, the worst ranking level before this point, didn't devolve into outright misery. It was more just a middling experience. But End of the Road is something else. From the very beginning of the game, it is painfully linear and it never gets any better. Replays of this chapter just feel like a series of non-stop opening doors. No item management or puzzles or combat or anything that I can sink my teeth into. The direction that this game gives you is misleading and infuriating to figure out on your own. The story presented to us is overwritten. There genuinely was no reason that we needed to include these two fucknuts. They added nothing that couldn't have been delegated to other characters in the game. For example, don't have a guy fire a rocket and miss, just have the creature burst out of its container while flying away. That's all I needed. It's not like Nielsen got a conclusion anyway. End of the Road feels like a chapter of ideas, where none of the ideas work out. Okay, how about here we have a section where you team up with the Tyrant? How about one where you run from the Tyrant? How about an optional route for players that lag behind? How about you escort an NPC? Now dodge sniper shots, now destroy mines. Okay, the Tyrant's back. Here's an overly complex boss. It's just all over the place, and it's a mess with an extremely unpleasant conclusion. We don't even get really good endings or anything. We get basically nothing. It's going on the bottom of the list. Get it out of here. I don't want it. And with that, we're done with all of the scenarios, or most of them, technically, because that's not all of them. They aren't scenarios in the same way as the previous ones have been, but in the collection, we can unlock 6 more levels known as Elimination and Showdown. And that's something that File 1 was sorely missing. Additional game modes to play after the main game. Something that lets us test ourselves in a way that the main game didn't. So let's see what we got. Elimination is like somebody used a randomizer and stuck the newly generated map into the game. It takes various rooms, not just from File 2, but also File 1 maps, items, and throws them together in this messy amalgamation of a layout they have to quickly learn and remember while hunting down every enemy present. Elimination 1 has this focus on zombies, often featuring zombified playable characters. Elimination 2 seems to be focused on poison enemies, so green zombies, wasps, spiders, that sort of thing, which apparently includes these massive plants that didn't show up anywhere else in the game, so that's neat to see. Sure do look kind of ugly though, in the sense that they're haphazardly placed in this area that they clearly don't belong. Their animations bizarrely swing all over the place, with no cleanup or refinement. Like, you would expect dirt particles or something to fly out whenever they burst from the ground, but no, they just kind of give the vibe that they were dragged and dropped here. Also took us a second to figure out if these things are actually killable, and if they're needed in order to finish the level, and it turns out they're not. So you're welcome if you end up playing this yourself. And then Elimination 3 is about the heavy hitters, which is mostly hunters, but you do get some lions and lickers in there as well. These are nothing that special, but as an additional side mode, I found these to be a very fun playthrough, especially with a group, as everybody gets to split up and pick off everything as efficiently as possible. Having to learn these maps on the fly is a surprisingly engaging test for your brain, and using the weapons and items that you happen upon forces you to improvise as you go. It's good stuff for a side game, nothing that would make you go out of your way to play Outbreak File 2, and if you're playing the game casually, you probably can just skip Elimination and Showdown, but if the gameplay really spoke to you, then I can see you getting a lot of enjoyment out of this. Showdown ends up being a little less interesting since it's just a boss rush. Showdown 1 ends up being all the bosses from File 1, and Showdown 2 are the ones from File 2. Then Showdown 3 just combines them all together into one super duper boss rush, and that's a little bit less interesting than the unique maps that we saw in Elimination. It does make me wonder just how much File 1 content they managed to cram onto this disc next to all the new content. It seems like they might have been able to basically have all the scenarios here, though it's a shame that they're still separated by discs. They could have done a Left 4 Dead 2 thing where you get to play all the old maps with the new features, but oh well. Just like the Elimination maps, improvisation is a huge component of the appeal, since you have to work with whatever guns you find thrown around. But I think what's really cool about it is that it puts you in scenarios where bosses that you would have never really fought before finally get to shine as actual opponents. Like Thanatos here. We used to just shoot him with the syringe and then that was it. But now I have to actually learn his movesets and fight him naturally. He is a lot more jumpy than I would have expected. Could have done without a lot of that wasted time since he's jumping on literally nothing. And the first version of his fight has this annoying habit where he takes enough damage and then he has to take a second to scream at you while he has invincibility frames. I don't know why that's included. Also, for some reason, they've completely ignored the giant plant boss from Flashback, which, I mean, like, I understand, I get it, that boss was annoying, so I'm glad I don't have to fight it, but the Queen Leech is still here, so god damn it. But other than all that, it's cool stuff. They even throw in a super boss at the end of Showdown 3 in the form of Tyrant C. Visually, it's just a normal tyrant, but it's got a red overcoat and this horn sticking out of its head, so it's over here looking like Punished Tyrant. Gameplay wise though, it's just a Super Tyrant R with a reskin, except they turned his animations up by like 500% as a substitute for difficulty. So now he can just stun lock you to death. Who needs actually engaging fights when you can just increase its speed by 5 times? He can be stun blocked back though, so he isn't that hard of a boss if you know what you're doing. Since this game mode is just a glorified boss rush, I'm less enthused about it, but it still ends up being a pretty good time. And again, I'm glad that it's here. And so with that, we have finally gone through the entire game. But it's Outbreak. And if playing through the first game taught me anything, it's that if you want to experience the game fully, you need to play through it a dozen or more times. We've still got higher difficulties and special items and unlocking all the endings and oh man. This is gonna go by really quickly for you guys watching a YouTube video, but damn, I have a lot ahead of me. The first game was not just overwhelming to complete, but pretty difficult for someone like myself who doesn't live and breathe Outbreak. And to be honest, it was pretty boring by the end. Look, part of the reason why this video took so long to come out is because I am just outbreaked out. I am done. I've had my fill. I've played the games so many times at this point. I'm good. I don't need to play this again for a very long time. Thank you so much for the experience. I'm good. We're done. This is why big YouTubers only talk about this game after beating it once on normal difficulty. But I'm here to suffer for your entertainment, so let's talk about the hard mode and higher. So the first thing to bring up are the many details that I noticed after playing the game solo on a difficulty where a single mistake can cause an instant restart. Doing this solo wasn't exactly my first choice, but it turns out I don't have a lot of friends who I'm willing to ask to suffer on my behalf, so solo it is. And that means that I would be a lot more dependent on my AI partners, who, if you recall from the first video, were surprisingly competent to the point that they would complete entire puzzles without me being there. Useful, to be sure, but it kind of robs you of the satisfaction of doing things yourself. So clearly what happened in File 2 was that the devs time traveled into the future, saw my video, and decided that they would take advice from some nerdy loser with a lisp that acts like he knows how to play these games, because the AI now seems to suffer from severe head trauma and are borderline useless. The whole system where certain characters have preferences about certain other characters seems like it would make sense on paper, but I found that in practice it put everybody in this awkward position where they fell into extremes that hindered them. Either they would run away from me and I would never see them again until I completed the level and saw that they died off screen somewhere, or they would be up my ass all the time to the point that they would ignore the threats around them, and I was left babying them if I wanted a slightly useful 4 extra inventory slots. I'd be trying to dodge lions and shit in order to save the incredibly limited ammo you get on very hard, and these fuckers will be eating every single attack that I dodged. All because they're constantly trailing behind me. This could be because File 2 generally has more dangerous enemies than File 1, but it's still an issue if the AI weren't designed to compensate for it. Now you don't even get puzzles solved for you in order to lessen the load. What the fuck are the guys who run away from me doing? Wasting whatever items they pick up before getting killed by a hunter that a competent player would have just run around? It doesn't help that aggressive characters are prone to waste their powerful weapons on regular zombies and stuff like that. You know, Kevin, that 45 would come in handy when we get to the fucking elephant, but no, sure, that downed zombie was the real threat that you needed to unload your entire fucking super gun on, and that's still not it. For some reason, there's no option to be able to use another character's ability, which is pretty important since this game makes them so much more vital. Hell, not just that, you can't command them to do anything except come closer or run away. I'm trying to bash this door down, so, you know, I could really use some help here. How about pushing this heavy object out of the way so I can get the goodies? A human player would come right over, no question, but these robot troglodytes just stand there staring at me, working my ass off. Even basic shit like me currently being on the floor dying requires me to initiate it by calling for help. I was so bewildered when I first went down and I saw my teammates just shut down, standing in place while they got eaten alive. I wasn't kidding when I said that they are just some extra inventory. That is the only use you are going to find for these idiots besides distracting some enemies for the brief period that they're alive. As for other things that I noticed on harder difficulties, they've made abilities like Alyssa's lockpicking and Mark's strength way more vital to progression. They used to just be for some extra items, though since you never knew what was behind a locked door, it wasn't always worth the time and effort to flip through these lockpicks. Now they decided that if you don't have an Alyssa on your team, then you should be subjected to tackle hell as you have to break down non-optional doors while monsters keep harassing you because breaking these things takes 500 fucking years. I see what you're doing. You're trying to give more value to those characters, but this was possibly the worst call you could have made. There's no defending the fact that you are now required to spend 3 minutes just mashing X. It's kind of disappointing to see that File 2 made so many bad changes alongside the positive ones. It really goes to show that these Outbreak games had so much more that they needed to learn and experiment with, but they never got the chance to really reach their stride. Anyways, we can go through each scenario now and talk about how the difficulty changes the experience. Just like before, you can expect items and enemy spawns to be moved around, along with different puzzle solutions, regardless of difficulty, which is the bare minimum that you need in a game like this. If I'm gonna play it 200 billion times, then there better be some randomization to keep things interesting. And spoilers, there isn't gonna be any more surprise monster reveals like the scissor tails in File 1's Outbreak. But that doesn't mean there isn't anything to talk about. For instance, Wild Thing Things does a really awesome thing when it comes to replaying it on hard and very hard. In that section, I talked about how the map is split up into different loops that all connect together, and they took complete advantage of that design, as each higher difficulty has you playing through all of the loops in a different order. By the time you get to very hard, you're basically playing the game backwards, going through the lions first before circling back to the earlier areas. It made replaying this chapter a blast. I mean, the lions kicked my ass, but aside from that, I was having a ball, and it really justified my love for this scenario. The downside is that it's also really unfriendly to solo players like myself. I already brought up Tackle Hell. Hard mode makes one of these vital doors in the central loop locked, so I guess if you really wanted to, you could just run around. But then very hard mode makes two of the doors locked, so now you have to open at least one. That sucks, but the big thing was the Mr. Raccoon medals. On very hard mode, you have to collect almost every single one of them to progress. A total of 11 medals spread out throughout the map. And when your inventory is just 4 slots, running around and picking up this many key items is more tedious than it needs to be. Obviously, this wouldn't be an issue with a full party of players, but lonely losers like myself deserve consideration too. So in the end, the tedium and the level design ends up evening out together. Still a positive experience though. Underbelly follows in Wild Thing's footsteps when it comes to locked doors. Hard mode moves the employee's key, but very hard mode just completely deletes it and forces you to bash the door open. Aside from that, the level ends up playing near identically. Knowing how to streamline the exploration and reducing the amount of time spent with megabytes helps a ton. So the only real challenge ends up being Gigabyte all the way at the end. He begins with a swarm of fleas already protecting him, and ammo is limited enough that you have to utilize Molotovs and pesticides in order to even stand a chance. I sucked and didn't get enough resources, so I thought I was fucked until I learned about a puzzle I missed every previous time I played that sends you running around the map in order to receive a shotgun, which was just enough to seal the deal. Just like before, the level is fairly unremarkable. Flashback was already pretty linear, so its idea of switching things up is to just change where you find the syringes and the order in which you inject plant bulbs. Other than that, I feel like this level is overly generous when it comes to weapons that it gives you. The axe alone is a monster that allows you to demolish anything, but even without that, the bottles to fill with green chemicals are plentiful, and the green chemical itself is unlimited. With good timing, you can get across the plants and you don't really have to fight any enemies. The hardest part was just its annoying boss fight, so it really didn't give me a very hard time at all. Desperate Times, however, was a real ordeal. When playing solo, you will need every single gun that you can possibly gather. If you end up missing one, then there is a decent chance that you won't be able to kill enough enemies in the final attack, which increases the number required to kill as the difficulty rises. Each time I replayed the scenario, I felt like I was winning by the skin of my teeth. I was having quite a bit of trouble with it, as I kept learning new things that inconvenienced me, like how short the time frame is for the horde to come in after you put in all the plates. I'm still not a huge fan of the final onslaught, but hey, the rest of the level is as engaging as ever. Mixing items around means that it plays like a new game every single time, so it remained fun throughout the entire playthrough. Little note though is that the Joker key could have really used a better explanation. I don't know if I'm missing something here, but this only is used to open a door with a simple lock in the basement. Nothing specifically Joker related. I was hoping for a Joker door or a Joker lock or something like that. When I couldn't figure it out, I thought that I just needed to break the door open like in Wild Things and Underbelly. But between the zombies and the gas piling in every 5 seconds, I was having a hard time breaking the thing down. That made me pretty reliant on figuring out where the Joker key went. In fact, finding the key at all is a pain in the ass. Look at this shit. They literally hid it behind a part of the railing that is impossible for you to see. I have no idea how anybody was supposed to naturally figure this out, let alone the actual usage of the key. Actually, wait, let me be a good video essayist and do a little bit of research here. What the fuck is a Joker? Okay, so the Joker is commonly used as a wild card. If you lose a card in your deck, then you just say that the Joker is that. It counts as everything. So I guess the connection that I was supposed to make is that the Joker key can be used on anything, even though it can only be used on one door specifically. I don't know. Does this make sense? Is this just me? Am I stupid? Chat, am I stupid? Leave a comment below if I'm stupid. So the scenario is still fun for the most part, but damn, that final bit is so hard. End of the Road was never good because of its linear design, and it turns out that when a level is as linear as this, then there isn't a whole lot that you can change in order to shake things up. One of the notable changes is that they put the MO disc that is required later in the lab area in an incredibly obscure spot that you'd never think to look for. So that's nice. Thank you, game. I love being lost for extended periods for no good reason. Mine locations vary on different difficulties, so it's a never-ending annoyance of accidentally stepping on one and accidentally losing your health. Other than that, the big hurdle was just learning how the hell Nyx worked. I was so confused because I'd hit the thing's core with the rocket launcher, and I just wasn't sure if I was missing, or the core wasn't fully open, or if its health pool was just big enough to tank a rocket launcher now. It was pretty frustrating. But after doing some research, I eventually figured it out. It turns out that the knife is surprisingly handy here. Showdown and Elimination had a similar problem to each other, where I just couldn't stop thinking about how much better my experience would be with additional players. Like, yeah, that probably goes for most of the game, but it especially is bad here. Time spent running through all of these rooms could have been cut in half, especially since we have things like Elimination 1's very hard mode putting all the weapons in the starting room, so you gotta keep running back in order to switch things out. Both game modes ended up feeling really restrictive to me, like I needed to follow a specific order of events in order to successfully finish it. No room for getting lost, no room for taking the wrong gun at the wrong time, and like all scenarios on very hard, basically no room for taking damage. I like these modes, but playing them on solo very hard just doesn't work for me. If you do though, I would really recommend using Kevin. His potshots let you really squeeze the most out of the ammunition that you're given, and in a game mode that is built entirely on killing monsters, that is invaluable. I do think that there are more meaningful changes in this game than File 1, which I noticed stopped being that remarkable after the Outbreak scenario. Some of the levels are more interesting than others, but it seems consistent with the overall quality. So the better scenarios just become better and the worse ones get worse. My conclusion stays the same though. These are not for me, and I don't think that they are for the average player. I do not like making a single mistake and then having to restart an entire level, especially since several of the levels in this game begin with a lot of this. Admittedly, I am missing a bit of context since I did all of these solo and not with a full party, but come on! I think I've played through the game enough times at this point, because just like before, there are a lot of extra things to do to fill out the collection. Of course, you have playthroughs on every single difficulty and with every single character, but then you also have the event checklist, which is even longer now because you have all these stupid alternate routes that you need to fill out. Special items are returning, and I'm happy to report that they made them ever so slightly less tedious. I'll take what I can get. They got rid of the stupid as hell randomization that was taking years off my life. Now everything is just organized based on the difficulty you played it on. That gets rid of a little bit of the busy work, but we're still having to cross-examine every character with every difficulty, and it's still just so awful to do. 260 invisible items is just insane to have to find. Very few games have this much of a disconnect between playing it casually and getting 100%. The rewards for doing so don't really change that much either. The collection remains the same in this game, just with even more content to unlock. You can even carry over a save file from File 1 in order to unlock content in this game and vice versa. All of your favorites are making a return. I know we got a bunch of Dr. Harsh fans watching this video. Don't you think I forgot about you? And yeah, I do know his name is actually Dr. Hirsch and it's misspelled in the menus. And I know I made a lot of people very angry by not recognizing the true potential of Rodney, so I would like to make a sincere apology to all you Rod heads out there. I'm sorry. Most of the characters are just boring background ones that aren't that special, but I'm sure a lot of Resident Evil fans are happy that we get to play as somebody like Marvin. What I'm a fan of though is that you can play as not just the Axeman himself, but his dying wife too. So we can go into Flashback and have this bizarre mindfuck of a situation where Lester keeps trying to kill his wife and clone. Collecting all the special items this time unlocks the female stickmen. So now Mr. Red and the gang can all have girlfriends. Only 3 of them though, so some might have to share. I should also mention that there are even more characters that were on the disc, but didn't end up being used. It's assumed that these were characters that were intended to be backwards transfers from an Outbreak File 3 that didn't happen, so these are only unlockable by using cheats. It's hard to be excited about most of them since the majority seem to just be normal people with basic names like Robert, Keith, or Gary. But we do get Hunk himself finally, both with a helmet and without. No more playing as Luke and pretending that he's somebody cooler.
Come on! Thanks, dude.
Oh my god, I did not think you'd sound like that. I'm also really glad that this game seemed to correct their mistakes regarding the costumes in the first one. I've heard the argument that, you know, oh, the costumes are supposed to be boring. They're just normal guys. And I'm like, fuck, come on, have some more creativity than that. Many of the old outfits were just awful. Boring casual clothes that make this cast of barely defined characters look even more generic than before. Well, now everyone gets multiple costumes, and I find them to be much more unique and varied this time around. Mark doesn't just put on shorts, he looks like a general now. George goes full doctor mode, and David strips down and gets those dogs out for everyone to enjoy. And of course, all the female characters get way more costumes than the male ones do. I would have expected no less. Overall, it's a major improvement from the first game. The last thing that you can unlock, not counting the stuff that nobody cares about like the concept art and cutscenes that you would have already seen, would be the new modes and additional features. Thankfully, this game went through the effort of allowing not just costume selection for your AI partner to be selectable, but you can even change them to the rando NPC characters if you unlock it in the collection. No longer is playing with a party of stupid nobodies restricted to an online experience. Then you get the same stuff as before with the difficulty options and an infinite mode for unlimited ammo during your run, but Capcom was definitely on the same page as the people who get really into these games. The ones with thousands of hours of playtime, doing challenge runs all the time, and dunking on all the shit that I struggled with. One of the new unlockable modes is Nightmare Mode, which makes health items heal less, enemies deal more damage to you, and ups the aggression of zombies so they're faster and meaner. Surprisingly, it's not a difficulty on its own, it's just an addition on top of whatever difficulty you choose. So if you want to do an easy nightmare run for the additional points in the end, then you can. But we all know who this is for. It's for the challenge seekers who make their very hard nightmare no damage speedrun playlists on YouTube, and more power to them. That's not something I'm here for, but god damn do they know what their audience wants. And that's not even the end of the potential challenges. Over on the fan-made Outbreak servers, they have something called Horror Mode, where it's hard difficulty on everything and the virus gauge starts at 80%. You all are insane. Like a drug addict looking for a stronger and stronger hit, you keep making the game harder and harder. I'm not afraid of a good challenge, but this shit's on a different level and I can't relate. And so, that's everything to talk about when it comes to Resident Evil Outbreak File 2. The first thing that you would ask when it comes to a direct sequel to a video game is, did it improve on the previous entry? Outbreak File 1 was a new idea for the franchise that suffered from having to pull back from all its ambitious ideas, so it made sense that the first game would have had some growing pains and that they need to address it in the second attempt. And Outbreak File 2? Kind of did? I mean, you can point to a handful of improvements here and there. More game modes is a huge win, more unique features for each character, more moves, better costumes, a better interface, a real tutorial exists now, and 3 out of the 5 scenarios being pretty good is a solid ratio. That said, it also takes an unfortunate step backwards in a handful of choices. The AI for your teammates is significantly worse. You still have some stinky bosses. They double down on needing to know obscure game knowledge. The endings are worse. The alternate paths idea almost never works out, and it managed to make the outright worst scenario in either game. I think my big takeaway would be that Outbreak File 2 does improve over the previous game as a whole, but not by a lot and certainly less than I would hope for. After beating it, I had to really think about if File 1 or File 2 was the better game. I made a poll on YouTube for people to say what they preferred, and assuming that you all have actually played the 2 games and aren't dirty, rotten liars just clicking on stuff like trained engagement monkeys, then the score ended up about 40-60 in favor of File 2, which, yeah, I think I'd agree with, but damn, that sure is close, isn't it? Like, you really would have hoped that people would say that File 2 is definitively better, but there is a bit of a divide there. And so that gets me thinking about Outbreak's legacy and how people talk about these games games. Outbreak really is a unique game from a specific era of the franchise, but it was at a time when the series was split and tossed around. Mainline games were on Nintendo and the significantly less popular spin-offs remained on PlayStation, which almost definitely affected the sales of each game. Outbreak was forced out before the team could fully realize their ideas, and then split even further between two different games. It never got to fully reach its potential, and the poor sales of File 2 put it in an early grave, and nothing since has come to perfecting its formula. In fact, there are essentially no copycats over the 2 decades since Outbreak's release. Some people have recommended indie projects similar in nature, and I have no idea about their actual quality, but that's still a wild amount of time to have not given this another shot. We are only just now getting new attempts at making a game like this, and that's because of people's memories and nostalgia towards it. Outbreak is highly regarded by a lot of Resident Evil fans, but it's clear that there are plenty of ways that it could have been improved, and a lot of extra work needed to go into it in order for it to reach the level of quality it deserved. As of right now, it stands out not necessarily because it's an amazing game that perfected a unique formula, but rather because it doesn't have any competition. Also, nostalgia probably plays a huge part in this too, but we don't need to get into that. Outbreak stands alone in style, and that makes it remarkable. And then you have a bunch of people reasonably asking why this game hasn't gotten a re-release, myself included. Some kind of modern version that combines the two games, removes the load times, ups the resolution, and is accessible by all modern systems. And like I said in the beginning of this video, I agree. I think that every classic game should be preserved, even the shitty ones. When are we getting a classic Resident Evil collection that better have Survivor on there? I'm going to fucking shit myself and it'll be your fault. But after playing through the two games, I can see why Capcom is so hesitant. Maybe about 1/3 of Outbreak is friendly to the average gamer. It's the percentage that you see most content creators play and talk about. The other 2/3 is anything above the normal difficulty. It's collecting all the special items. It's playing the game solo without friends. It's having 4 inventory slots on all but one character. It's a virus gauge that keeps pressure on you at all times. It's needing to learn unintuitive mechanics that would be seen as exploits to anybody unfamiliar with the game. And they're already playing with fire with the game using fixed camera angles, which a certain percentage of modern gamers are just outright allergic to for some reason. And that's obviously not all the reasons why a game like this wouldn't be appetizing to a modern gamer, but it is enough. A majority of this game feels like it was made by classic Resident Evil veterans for classic Resident Evil veterans, and those are becoming rarer and rarer as time goes on. The people who are really into this game are a completely separate breed on their own, one that probably isn't very profitable. But this is all going to come off really bad in retrospect when an Outbreak collection is announced and I look like a fool for the rest of time. Anyways, that's a really long-winded way for me to say that Outbreak File 1 and 2 are neato little games, but definitely flawed, and I would love to see this idea done again in the future. I'm going to give Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 a 6 out of 10. The same score as File 1, but I do think it's better just slightly. I'd still rather play one of the mainline titles over this, and 100%ing it should not be done by anybody ever, but it's still a pretty good time and very interesting for how unique it is. I know I'm not the most knowledgeable person when it comes to this game. I got plenty of info wrong in the first video, I got some info confused with other things that actually happen in this game, and I forgot some notable stuff. Like, I can't believe I forgot to bring up that you can just bail from Outbreak's finale. That shit's hilarious on its own. I could have worked with that. But I know I make mistakes, and I'm glad that you all can still find me entertaining regardless. I try to play these games as thoroughly as I can for research, but even then, things will slip through the cracks. I laughed whenever I got a comment like this from somebody who was clarifying how Mark's block works, plus some other details. These are so specific and small. I don't know how people are keeping track of all these things, especially when they change ever so slightly between the two games. But thank you all for still watching and enjoying my content. I know it takes a long time to get these videos out, and neither YouTube's algorithm nor people waiting for content like that. It takes a long time to get these things made, and they just keep getting longer. Hey, remember when I said this video could be potentially shorter than the first one? What a fucking idiot. I assume at At this rate, each new video is just going to be longer than the last. But to every person who leaves a comment saying that they are looking forward to my next video, it really does encourage me to get back into these, and it means so much that someone would be excited about my content. If you would like to support me, you can do the basic stuff like leaving a like and subscribing. Apparently, hypes are a thing. I don't know anything about them, but they claim to help new videos get seen. And of course, you can support me on Patreon. Go tell me what you supported me for, and maybe if you're interested, you can see the art I make there too. It's a huge win to have nice crossover between people who like my art and people who like my videos. And if you fall into that category, you can also follow me on Twitter and various other websites too. Thank you all so much for watching to the end, and next time, we'll be taking the big leap. It's arguably the biggest game in the franchise, the one responsible for an entire shift in the genre, and one of the most popular and widely distributed games of all time. Next, we'll be taking a look at Resident Evil 4. See you then.